Hey guys, tonight we're wandering back to the cobbled alleys and fog-drenched doorsteps of Victorian London. You're wearing uncomfortable shoes, your coat smells faintly of coal smoke, and someone just stepped in front of you carrying an entire side of beef wrapped in a newspaper. That's normal. What's not normal, at least not to our modern sensibilities, is that the quiet figure trailing behind this scene notebook in one pocket and a neatly wrapped cucumber sandwich in the other is a detective. Yes, that's right. A real Victorian detective. Solving crimes in the age of horse manure gas lamps and approximately zero DNA tests. You're not Sherlock Holmes. Not even close. You don't have a violin or a dramatic drug habit. What you do have is an itchy uniform if you're a police detective, or a threadbare coat if you're more of the freelance variety, and a long list of cases that range from the stolen to the mildly misplaced to the mysteriously soggy. You'll probably get lost before you solve anything, and honestly, you'll definitely be hungry. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop your location and local time in the comments. Makes me feel like we're all sipping tea across time zones. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're trudging down Whitechapel Road, boots slick with rain, coat collar, up trying not to inhale the scent of warm oysters being hawked by a man with suspiciously few teeth. It's 1871. Your boss is angry your socks are wet, and someone has apparently stolen a magistrate's prize-winning turnip. Again. The fog curls around your ankles like a cat that wants something. Probably more turnips. A few gas lamps flicker, one lets out a small spark and dies. Somewhere in the distance, a carriage clatters past the horses snorting steam. And beside you, your partner pauses, unwraps a cloth bundle and offers you half a cucumber sandwich. Breakfast, he says, with the grim finality of a man who's been awake for 3 days and still hasn't found that turnip. Now this might sound like a joke, because it almost is, but there's some truth to the snack. In the Victorian imagination, cucumber sandwiches weren't just food. They were social markers, symbols of restraint, gentility, and not eating your feelings with sausage rolls. They were quiet and elegant, and required crustless bread, which meant you had servants. Or at the very least you had time to make your food look boring. You take a bite. It's cold. The butter is thin. The cucumber tastes like polite regret. Back in the early days of the detective division at Scotland Yard, formed officially in 1842, just a decade after the Metropolitan Police, the job wasn't exactly glamorous. You weren't riding trains or fighting masterminds. You were more likely to be solving disputes over improperly placed chamber pots. Most of your work is observation. Following people. Making notes. Standing behind large ferns in drawing rooms while someone cries about a missing brooch that turns out to be inside the cat. You develop a deep relationship with silence. You get used to listening. This particular night, you're assigned to trail a petty thief who's been lifting lace handkerchiefs from a hat shop. He's not dangerous. He's just slippery, and surprisingly fond of swan-shaped cake tins. You step into the shop, greeted by the warm hiss of gaslight and the chilly glare of Miss Edwina Blivers, the hatter's assistant. She's suspicious of your motives, and even more suspicious of your damp cuffs. But she offers you tea. With milk, of course. This is England. And on the saucer without comment sits another cucumber sandwich. Slightly soggy this time. You eat it anyway. The detectives of this era, at least the ones who got written about, carried themselves like middle managers with secrets. They were meticulous, sceptical, and constantly burdened with a stack of paperwork the size of a modest sideboard. They had to dress to blend in, which usually meant looking like underpaid clerks, and carried nothing more intimidating than a notebook and a pocket watch. Guns rare. Badges. Not really a thing yet. But sandwiches. Those were common. Lunch was often a mobile affair. You'd grab what you could from a street vendor, meat pies if you were feeling bold bread and cheese if you weren't, and cucumber sandwiches if you were trying to keep your gloves clean. Because yes, gloves were part of the detective aesthetic. You never knew when you'd be shaking hands with a bishop or sifting through trash for a missing will. Here's a mainstream historical fact to ground all this. The detective branch began with just 8 officers. That's it. 8 men to cover all of London. Their job was mostly reactive, called in for complex cases where the beat constables were stumped. They had no formal training, no forensic labs, and their best tool was a keen eye and a good pair of boots. Preferably dry ones, which yours are not. Now here's a quirkier truth. Many detectives develop strong personal preferences for their meals on patrol. There's a documented case of one officer, Detective Inspector Gorringe, who ate the same lunch every day for over a decade, cucumber sandwiches, strong tea and a single boiled egg. This became such a known detail that suspects would joke about leaving eggshells at crime scenes. And as for scholarly debate, well, historians still argue whether the cucumber sandwich habit was born of social aspiration or sheer practicality. After all, the sandwich was light, neat, and easy to eat without a mess, perfect for men who might have to duck behind a cart mid-bite or pursue a suspect without gravy stains down their front. Or maybe, as some suggest, it was a way for middle-class detectives to distance themselves from the rougher foods of street vendors and align themselves with the genteel ideal of discretion and calm. Who knows, maybe they just liked the crunch. The sandwich is finished, the shop is empty, and the lace thief, he's long gone out the back door and into the night. You sigh. Tomorrow's another case. Maybe something thrilling, like a haunted teapot or a scandalous missing bonnet. But tonight, you walk home under the dim glow of gaslight, your notebook tucked away, and your stomach lined with pale green slices of vague nourishment. The rain taps gently on your shoulders. Somewhere nearby someone sneezes into a muff. And that my sleepy sleuth is how your evening begins. Your boots leave half moons in the mud as you shuffle past a line of carriages waiting outside a music hall. The gaslight flickers again, casting long, wavering shadows. Somewhere behind you a man is arguing with a dog. This too is normal. You ignore it. You've got other things on your mind, namely, how all of this started. How you and the 8 other unfortunate souls in London became the city's first official detectives. The year is 1829, you're not yet a detective. You're a bobby, a constable in the freshly minted Metropolitan Police brainchild of Sir Robert Peel. That's where the nickname comes from, by the way. Not from anything particularly flattering, just Bobby short for Robert. It's not glamorous. In fact, people hate you. You're patrolling streets that don't want you there. The public sees the uniform and assumes you're either a government spy or someone about to tell them to stop having fun, which honestly you probably are. The early bobbies didn't even carry weapons, just a rattle, a stick and a tall hat you could technically use to carry sandwiches, though no one recommends it. The hat's shaped like a stovepipe and makes you feel a bit like a disgraced magician. But it's supposed to make you visible from far away, which is great if you want people to throw things at you from second-story windows. At first, most of your job is stopping fights, checking lamps, and retrieving the occasional drunk from a rain barrel. But soon, crime gets clever. Petty theft becomes organised. Scams become elaborate. And suddenly, someone needs to do more than shout "Oi!" and chase a thief into the Thames. So in 1802 the detective branch is born. A shadowy group within the larger force. Less marching, more thinking. Less bellowing, more lingering. You're promoted, not because you're brilliant necessarily, but because you're quiet. And you once solved a dispute over a missing bonnet, using only tea, a lie about a ghost, and a coin toss. That's detective material. Your new gear plain clothes, no uniform. A small notebook, maybe a pocket knife, definitely not a gun. Guns are frowned upon unless you're dealing with armed robbery, and even then it's often more about showing up late and looking disappointed. The press isn't impressed with you. They call the detective branch a secret police, and not in the exciting James Bond way. More in the we don't trust anyone who works quietly and has crumbs on their lapels way. But public opinion starts to shift with time. You catch a few high-profile pickpockets. Help track a con man posing as a vicar. Solve a jewel theft by following a trail of marzipan. People begin to see detectives as necessary, even useful. Your nickname changes. No longer just a Bobby. You're now a Tex plainclothes man, or if someone's being cheeky, a nosy git with a notebook. Mainstream history tells us that Scotland Yard, the headquarters of the Metropolitan Police, becomes a symbol of authority during this time. And yet inside things are charmingly chaotic. Paper stacked on desks, like miniature leaning towers of Pisa. Oil lamps that flicker every time someone sneezes. And detectives arguing over whether the new ink smells like licorice or despair. Here's a niche tidbit. Early detectives often supplemented their income by doing private work off the books. Need to find a lost poodle, misplaced a will. Want to know if your cousin is secretly working as a stage actor? There's a detective for that. For a few extra shillings, of course. Just don't tell the commissioner. You're now working longer hours, usually in the rain, and have developed a personal relationship with every pigeon in your beat. Your favourite one is missing a toe, and seems deeply suspicious of the concept of windows. Still, you push on. Not because the work is glamorous, it isn't, but because there's something oddly satisfying about restoring a sense of order. Even if that order mostly involves returning stolen toffee tins and settling tea shop feuds. Historians still argue whether the early success of the detective branch was due to individual brilliance or sheer luck. One camp believes it was the slow build of urban intelligence, understanding neighbourhoods, repeat offenders, and daily routines. The other side says you all mostly stumbled around until someone tripped over a clue. You'd weigh in on the debate, but you're too busy chasing a man who may or may not have stolen a bishop's walking stick. He's fast. You're full of sandwich. Back at the station, the atmosphere is somewhere between a gentleman's club and a slightly chaotic library. The walls are yellowed with tobacco smoke. The desk sergeant has a moustache like a sleeping squirrel. Files are organised by someone who clearly thinks the alphabet is a myth. You sit down with your partner, open your notebook, and scrawl a few cryptic lines. Thursday suspect wore spats. Appeared nervous around parsnips. Possible connection to umbrella thefts. Must investigate. You tuck the book into your coat nibble, the edge of a sandwich you stashed 3 hours ago, and glance at the time. It's past midnight. The city outside is quieter now, except for the occasional horse snort or the clatter of a woman in heels hurrying home from the theatre. The station cat, there's always a station cat, jumps onto your lap and begins licking the sandwich crumbs off your sleeve. You let him. He's doing a better job than most of your colleagues. There's no glory in this job. No medals. Just long nights, short lunches, and the occasional moment where you feel like you've made a difference, even if it's only returning a missing parasol. You close your eyes for just a second, the flicker of the oil lamp painting strange shapes on the wall. You think about how far you've come from hated constable to sort of respected gumshoe. You think about how your feet still haven't dried since Tuesday, and you wonder what tomorrow will bring. Hopefully not another turnip case. The tea is cold. Again. You don't complain. No one complains about cold tea in the detective room unless they want to be volunteered for night sewer patrol. You just take a slow sip and try not to think about what exactly is floating on the surface. Possibly biscuit crumbs. Possibly older than the Prime Minister. Your morning begins not with drama, but with the rustle of paper. Someone's misplaced the ledger. Again, it's always the ledger. A massive, leather-bound beast of a thing, filled with names, dates, and curious little doodles of suspect hats. One detective has a habit of drawing monocles next to entries for suspicious gentlemen. You're assigned a case that isn't exactly urgent. A local banker claims someone's been watching his house at night. You're told to observe discreetly. You being you interpret discreetly as sitting behind a hedge with a sandwich for 6 hours. Here's what most people don't realise about Victorian detective work. It's slow, agonisingly slow. Most of your day is spent waiting, watching, scribbling in a notebook you've already filled twice over with comments like woman with suspiciously large umbrella or man selling bootlaces, possibly too cheerful. Still, there's comfort in the slowness. It's quiet. It gives you time to think. About the case. About lunch. Mostly about lunch. You pull a familiar bundle from your pocket. Cucumber sandwich. Still cool, still neat, still somehow managing to smell faintly of old wallpaper paste. You take a bite. The crunch is soft. A dignified crunch, if such a thing exists. Why cucumber sandwiches, you wonder? The answer is a combination of culture class and culinary cowardice. The Victorians, at least the polite middle-class ones, were deeply suspicious of anything too flavourful. Food was supposed to be gentle, polite, unthreatening. Cucumber sandwiches ticked all those boxes. They were light, they were tidy, and they didn't leave gravy stains on your paperwork, which, in your line of work, mattered. Another detective nearby swears by ham and pickle, but his coat always smells slightly of vinegar, so you keep your distance. Back to the stakeout. It's been 3 hours, and the most exciting thing you've seen is a cat riding a delivery cart, like it owns the place. You note it anyway. Stranger things have been relevant in court. A knock at your shoulder. Your partner, Gregory. He offers you tea in a cracked enamel mug. No sugar, he says apologetically. Smith took the last lump. Claims it helps him interrogate faster. You both know that's nonsense, but you nod solemnly anyway. Gregory sits beside you with a groan that suggests both his knees are unionised and currently striking. Still watching the banker's house, he asks. You gesture toward the window. A curtain twitches. Third time you say. Might be the wind. Might be the banker, Gregory replies, looking out to see if you're still watching. You sip your tea, watch the head shift slightly in the breeze, and wonder not for the first time how anyone solves anything like this. Let's shift perspective for a moment. In modern detective dramas, investigations move fast. There are fingerprints, DNA, satellite imagery. Back in your world, you have smudged ink, blurry footprints, and the word of a milkmaid who may or may not be under the influence of elderflower cordial. Mainstream history notes that by the 1850s, London was seeing hundreds of detectives employed across the city. Yet only a few gained notoriety, and even fewer wrote anything down. Records were often lost, misfiled, or turned into kindling during the winter months. So what do we really know about your day? We know it involved a lot of walking. London was vast and full of winding streets, many of them named after things they no longer contained, like Bread Street. No bakeries, Milk Lane, no cows, and Threadneedle Street, mysteriously free of needles. We know your boots were heavy, your coat heavier, and your pockets full of odds and ends, a stub of pencil, 2 sandwich crusts, a wax-sealed letter you meant to deliver last week, and a sketch of a suspect's oddly shaped ears. And we know that food, simple neat food, was a constant companion. There's a recorded instance of a detective in 18th who reportedly solved a theft at a tea house solely because he visited it so often the staff assumed he worked there. Which, to be fair, he sort of did. Want a fringe tidbit? At least 2 detectives kept secret snack stashes hidden in hollowed-out law books. One even had an entire jar of pickled onions concealed behind a fake filing cabinet drawer. It wasn't so much a security measure as a deterrent. No one wanted to get that close to pickled onions in a confined space. And of course there's ongoing scholarly debate over how detectives balance their professional image with the intensely domestic realities of their day-to-day life. Were they figures of authority or merely professional eavesdroppers with strong tea preferences? Did their choice of sandwich signal a deeper alignment with Victorian ideals of restraint and composure? Or did they just eat whatever didn't fall apart in a coat pocket? Back to you. Gregory leans his head back against the brick wall, eyes half closed. Remember that woman who tried to frame her neighbour with a forged love letter? You nod. The one who signed it, yours hungrily. That's the one. There's a silence as you both consider how utterly unconvincing that signature was. You think she meant longingly, you ask. Gregory shrugs. Might have just been lunchtime. The sun sets slowly, casting pale gold across the rooftops. The banker's curtain doesn't move again. A stray dog ambles past, with what appears to be a pastry box in its mouth. Somewhere a piano plays the same 3 notes in a loop badly. Your tea is gone. Your sandwich mostly crumbs. Your patience still intact, surprisingly. And so you stay, watching, waiting, thinking. Because being a Victorian detective isn't about dramatic confrontations or lightning-fast deductions. It's about the long game. The slow, thoughtful unravelling of half-truths and gentle deceptions. It's about knowing the rhythm of the street, the weight of a lie, the smell of a good sandwich, smell of a... You settle deeper into your coat as the first stars appear, already preparing for the next uneventful hour. The sandwich once again makes its appearance, just as the night grows colder. There's something dependable about it. The white bread soft and trimmed with the precision of a librarian's haircut. The butter applied with such moderation it could be a sermon on restraint. And of course the cucumber itself, thin, pale, and chillingly aloof. You chew thoughtfully, eyes still on the banker's window, no movement. It's during this moment, halfway through the second triangle, crustless, and mildly damp, that the question fully hits you. Why cucumber sandwiches? And more importantly, why are so many of your colleagues tucking them into their coat pockets, like they're preparing for a duel at an herbaceous garden party? The answer lies deeper in the folds of Victorian food culture than most people care to explore. But you've got time. So let's wander back a bit. In the mid-1800s, Britain was knee-deep in industrialisation, tea obsession, and class anxiety. The country was transforming from a farming society to an urban one, and with that came new social rituals like afternoon tea. Afternoon tea, invented by Anna the Duchess of Bedford, was less a necessity and more a polite way of not fainting from hunger between lunch and dinner. Served with dainty bites of food that wouldn't sully one's gloves or reputation, it became a hallmark of genteel life. And cucumber sandwiches? They were its crowned jewel. Why? Because cucumbers were delicate, seasonal, and generally impractical for the lower classes. They symbolised a certain kind of fussy abundance, like lace doilies or footstools shaped like lions. Eating them said, "I have servants," and possibly a fainting couch. So when detectives, many of whom came from modest beginnings, started adopting the cucumber sandwich as a lunch on the go, it was more than a meal. It was a quiet nod to respectability, a portable class upgrade. Of course, it also helped that cucumber sandwiches didn't smell. Imagine tailing a suspect through a flower market while munching on roast beef and horseradish. You'd be made in seconds. But cucumbers, they barely register. They're the ninja of vegetables. Still not everyone's convinced. Historians still argue whether the cucumber sandwich habit among detectives was truly aspirational or simply pragmatic. Some suggest it was all about cost and availability. Bread was cheap, butter was common. And cucumbers, especially during warmer months, were abundant enough to be sliced, salted, and slapped onto bread with minimal fuss. Others argue that detectives wanted to appear non-threatening and respectable when they questioned shopkeepers or chatted with maids. After all, it's hard to seem menacing when your breath smells of English garden. Back at the station, Sergeant Pilbeam insists cucumber sandwiches are the only food that doesn't betray a man, which is ironic, considering he also believes milk is a form of controlled poison. Quirky. Certainly. But there's some method in the madness. Pilbeam, who once solved a forgery ring by noticing the ink smelled faintly of lavender, swears by neatness in all things. His coat is always pressed. His handwriting is absurdly elegant. And his sandwiches always cut into perfect rectangles, with the slices aligned like soldiers on parade. You once asked him why he doesn't try something else, egg and cress, perhaps. He looked at you with the mournful expression of a man who has seen too much. Eggs lie, he said. You can't trust a food that changes texture that many times. Fair enough. Now let's talk sandwiches as an actual investigative tool. One case, truly riveting in its dullness, involved a stolen snuff box from the office of a minor shipping clerk. The suspect list included a janitor, a visiting uncle, and a parrot with a history of theft he once made off with a monocle. You were assigned to observe the janitor, discreetly, which meant following him from his boarding house to the tavern and back each evening. One night, perched behind a stack of potato crates, you unwrapped your sandwich and waited. And waited. And waited. Nothing happened until the janitor sat on the crate, next to you pulled out his sandwich, also cucumber, and said, "Hope you're not here for the snuff box." My uncle took it. Loves collecting useless things. And just like that, the case was closed. Over sandwiches. Did you report it? Of course. Did anyone care? Not especially. The snuff box turned out to be fake. Still, the sandwich had done its duty, kept you company, calmed suspicion, and facilitated casual conversation. No interrogation required. There's something inherently trustworthy about someone eating a cucumber sandwich. It suggests you're not in a rush. You have clean hands. You're not planning on punching anyone in the near future. It's disarming. That's part of the charm. In a world where detectives were still negotiating their image, were they officers or observers, gentlemen or spies, the sandwich became a subtle accessory, like a notebook or a cravat. Want another fun detail? Some detectives used their sandwich napkins as makeshift evidence bags. Need to grab a suspicious button or a stray hairpin? Just tuck it into the wax paper. Sorted. One detective, famously frugal, reused his sandwich cloths so often they eventually became case files of their own, smeared with ink crumbs, and the occasional helpful scribble, like lady at number 12, definitely hiding something under hat. Was it professional? Absolutely not. But it was very, very human. Which really is what Victorian detective work was at its core, a mix of method, instinct, and making do. You didn't have fingerprint kits or crime scene tape. You had chalk, a sharp eye, and the world's most apologetic lunch. As the night stretches on, and the stars above London peek timidly through the smoke, you finish your sandwich and tuck the wax paper into your coat. You'll reuse it tomorrow. Maybe scribble something on it. Maybe wrap a clue in it. Or maybe, just maybe, use it to keep your next sandwich dry. A breeze stirs the hedge. The banker's curtain flickers again. You narrow your eyes, lean forward, and prepare to do absolutely nothing for the next 3 hours. Because that, dear sleuth, is detective work. It's not dramatic. It's not fast. But it is real. And it's better with sandwiches. You wake up slightly confused. There's a pigeon perched on your knee looking at you like you've just interrupted its novel. The sky is still dark, but the air has shifted that damp pre-dawn coolness that tells you it's somewhere between late night and might as well give up. Gregory is snoring gently beside the hedge, his hat tilted over one eye, and a crust of bread still clutched in his hand. There's a contentment to it, really. No crimes thwarted, no villains apprehended, but no new paperwork either. You stretch your back and wonder how on earth any of you managed to stay awake during stakeouts. Then again, maybe that's why the cucumber sandwich is the detective's constant companion. It doesn't invigorate. It doesn't energize. But it sits there, unoffended by your inattention, ready to be eaten slowly, while your thoughts drift between suspects and whether or not you remembered to pay the coal man. Today's case is different. Less about watching windows, more about tracking the slippery movements of some of London's gentlest rogues. Petty thieves, tricksters. People who've elevated minor crime to a kind of soft art. Your assignment: investigate a series of disappearing umbrellas. Yes. Umbrellas. 6 have gone missing from the entryway of a popular tea room near Charing Cross. All belong to men of good reputation, one of whom, horrified, had to walk 3 full blocks under a borrowed parasol. He's now emotionally unavailable and won't speak of the event. You arrive at the tea room mid-morning. It's charming in that faded lace way. Mismatched teacups, a smell of bergamot and warm scones. A small table near the door has a little sign, "Umbrellas here, please. Not responsible for mischief." You raise an eyebrow. That's oddly specific. You sit, order tea. Accept the complimentary cucumber sandwich. It's crisp, unusually thick cut today. The server, a young woman with a bun as tight as a banker's budget, offers you a smile that could curdle milk. You sip slowly. Observe. There's a man in the corner with a sketch pad, another reading a newspaper upside down, and near the umbrella stand a child, too small to reach it, unless he's trained in acrobatics, which, given the state of Victorian chimney sweeping, is depressingly plausible. You watch. Wait. Eventually someone leaves. The man with the upside-down paper. No umbrella in hand. Odd, because he had one when he arrived. You follow Sandwich, still in hand, chewing quietly. He walks briskly, darts into an alley, and vanishes. You step in just as he's closing the lid of a crate. Inside 5 umbrellas, all labelled all dry. And interestingly, one with a note attached that says, "To be returned after tea. Just needed the walking stick." You stare. He shrugs. "Borrowed, not stolen," he offers helpfully. "Besides, the one with the silver tip helps with my gout. It's not a crime worth jail. Barely worth paperwork." But you sigh and make a note anyway. This is the kind of case your department handles daily. Odd, low-stakes offences that paint the city in subtle shades of mischief. Let's pause here for a historical fact. By the 1860s, Victorian London had developed a surprisingly sophisticated system for handling minor offences. Petty theft was rampant, not because everyone was malicious, but because urban poverty mixed with social aspiration like gin and tonic. People stole because they needed to, yes. But also because some things like silver spoons or stylish umbrellas felt like tickets to legitimacy. And here's a curious tidbit: umbrella theft became so common that certain gentlemen began carrying decoy umbrellas, cheap ones, already broken at the tip, to leave at public stands while keeping the real one tucked discreetly under their arm. A deception within a deception. Detectives sometimes use the same method. Leave a tempting object wait nearby and see who takes the bait. You tried it once with a decoy sandwich, but no one touched it. Apparently cucumber doesn't tempt thieves. Scholars continue to argue over whether the policing of petty crimes in Victorian London helped maintain public order, or simply reinforced class boundaries. After all, stealing a loaf of bread might land you in jail, while defrauding a dozen investors could be explained away with a sad poem and an apologetic bow. But you just want to get through the day without losing your notebook or your lunch. Back at the station, you file your report. Subject umbrella displacement pattern suggests intentional but temporary removal. Motive ergonomic. Conclusion: no prosecution. Recommendation: suggest signage change. Perhaps umbrellas watched by invisible detective. The sergeant grunts. Could work, he says. People fear what they can't see. Later over tea, you sit with Gregory and a new recruit named Tansley, who has the misplaced optimism of someone who still believes in organised coat hooks. Tansley asks if all cases are this absurd. Gregory shrugs. Sometimes the thief is a goat. Sometimes it's your own reflection in a mirror. You nod. And sometimes it's the sandwich that solves it. They stare. You explain. The tea room sandwich was unusually thick. That detail stuck with you. The server must have sliced it fresh, which meant she was watching carefully, which meant she saw who took the umbrella, which meant she allowed it, which meant it was known, which meant exactly no crime at all. Gregory looks impressed. Tansley looks confused. The station cat jumps onto your lap and immediately begins stealing sandwich crusts. You let it. Outside, the rain picks up polite but persistent, and somewhere out there another umbrella is quietly being borrowed. The drizzle becomes a steady tap against the window panes as you retreat into the warmth of the detective break room. A grand name for a narrow space, smelling faintly of coal dust, pipe smoke, and something bread adjacent that no one dares identify. Gregory is already there, coat steaming faintly, as he pours tea into a chipped mug labelled "Property of Not You." The chairs creak, the fire pops. The sandwich in your pocket is just beginning to soften at the edge's ideal conditions for thoughtful chewing. Your next case arrives not with a shout, but a handwritten note folded into a delicate triangle and placed quietly on your desk. Request for discreet female assistance, St. Mildred's Convent. Suspected ledger tampering. Also missing lemon drizzle cake. You raise an eyebrow. A convent Gregory smirks. They probably want someone delicate. You do have the softest voice in the station. It's true. You once interrogated a bookseller so gently that he confessed and offered you a job. Still, you're not going alone. Enter Miss Wren, one of Scotland Yard's first unofficial lady detectives. Of course she's not called that. Officially she's a research clerk, but she's solved more cases than anyone else on the third floor, and no one dares question her methods or her hat. You meet her outside the convent. It's grey-stoned and ivy-covered with a bell tower that leans just enough to look curious, not unsafe. Inside, the scent of beeswax and lavender hangs heavy in the air, and the nuns move silently like creaky ghosts in well-pressed habits. Sister Agnes greets you with a nod and an anxious glance at a crumpled recipe card. The cake was part of the bishop's visit, she says. It was left to cool. Now it's gone, along with a week's worth of petty cash. You glance at Miss Wren. She smiles sweetly and produces a notebook with edges sharper than her spectacles. We'll need tea, she says gently, and perhaps a list of everyone with access to the kitchen, and a sample of your handwriting. Within minutes, she has 2 suspects and a theory. Within the hour, 3 nuns have confessed to different crimes, one of which involves absconding with a pew cushion during a moment of spiritual confusion. You meanwhile examine the scene of the cake disappearance. A tray sits near the hearth empty except for a single raisin and a smudge of icing shaped suspiciously like a thumbprint. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Victorian women, though rarely given official policing titles, were often essential in investigations, especially in matters requiring tact, empathy, or a good memory for lace patterns. Female detectives weren't common, but they existed sometimes, working quietly behind the scenes, sometimes under the guise of clerks or assistants. Miss Wren, for example, has a photographic memory and a tendency to win at cards using psychology alone. You once watched her deduce an entire counterfeit operation based solely on a man's choice of cravat. But it's not just women who play detective differently, it's the approach. She requests a tea service be brought to the interrogation room. A storage closet with a single candle sets up 3 mismatched cups and offers cake store-bought, she clarifies gently, not stolen. The sisters relax. Talk. Within 10 minutes, one admits she may have borrowed the petty cash to fund a small rescue operation for injured pigeons. I was going to return it, she says, after selling knitted mittens. You nod mostly because you don't know what else to do. Meanwhile, Miss Wren has solved the cake conundrum. It wasn't stolen, she says, with absolute confidence. It was eaten, in one sitting, by Sister Beatrice. The accused blushes furiously. I thought I'd slice it, but it was warm, and it just vanished. As for the thumbprint, left by Sister Teresa, who tried to flip it onto a cooling rack and failed, no crime, just stress baking and sugar temptation. Back in the carriage, heading toward the station, you and Miss Wren split a cucumber sandwich in near silence. She wrinkles her nose. You really eat these willingly. You shrug. They're tidy, quiet. No one ever suspects a man holding a cucumber sandwich of malicious intent. She hums. Interesting logic. Suppose that's why you always look mildly innocent. There's a pause. She digs into her handbag and pulls out a small paper-wrapped parcel, unfolds it, offers you a triangle of watercress and mustard on rye. Real flavour, she says. Don't get used to it. You bite in. It's startling, sharp, alive, like someone's shouted in your mouth. You still like cucumber better. Let's slip in a fringe detail. In some upper-class households, cucumber sandwiches were prepared by specially trained kitchen staff with exact measurements. Bread no thicker than 7mm cucumber slices, chilled precisely. And butter salted by hand. This was not food. This was edible restraint. Miss Wren sighs and watches the clouds roll by. Do you think it matters, she asks. Whether we solve cake mysteries or crown jewel heists, you consider it. People sleep better when their small chaos is put right. She nods. I suppose that's something. Scholars still argue over how female detectives like Wren fit into the rigid structures of Victorian justice. Some say they were underappreciated pioneers. Others argue they were barely tolerated anomalies tools used only when male pride allowed it. What's not debated is their effectiveness. As you near the station, the air smells of coal smoke and bread again. A comfort in its own way. Inside you file the case as resolved non-criminal pastry incident. Gregory reads the note and chuckles. Ah, he says, another day, another dessert-related misunderstanding. You sit, sip lukewarm tea. Unwrap another sandwich. Outside the rain begins again, gentle, persistent, familiar. Inside the city hums with secrets, and you cucumber in hand are ready for the next one. Section 7. The rain has mellowed into a mist, less an inconvenience now, and more a permanent feature of the atmosphere, like lamp soot, or loud opinions about marmalade. You're back on the street, coat collar high another case tucked under your arm, like a damp newspaper. Murder, allegedly. Though as with most things in your detective experience, it promises to be far less exciting than the word implies. No crimson splashes across ballroom walls. No dramatic final utterances about revenge or poisoned chalices. Just one retired greengrocer, recently expired in his armchair, and a nosy nephew who insists something doesn't smell right. That's because the greengrocer died next to a wedge of Stilton, which, let's be fair, has been known to start arguments from 2 rooms away. You arrive at the scene, a modest row house, with curtains drawn in precisely the way that says morning, but could also say drafty windows. The constable at the door, young and pink-cheeked, waves you in, and immediately flees to avoid the smell. You can't blame him. Inside the air is thick with cheese and dust, and a faint hint of lavender talc. The body is slumped peacefully in an armchair. There's no struggle, no blood, just an overturned teacup, and a plate with the last bite of fruitcake still clinging to the fork. Poison, the nephew whispers theatrically. You resist the urge to roll your eyes. Here's your mainstream historical anchor. Victorian England was obsessed with poison. Between arsenic-laced wallpaper and rat bait that looked suspiciously like sugar cubes, it wasn't paranoia, it was practicality. Murder by poison was the bogeyman of the age. Quiet, undetectable, and often committed within the same walls where one later cried over the will. But in your line of work, most murders turn out to be things like improperly canned chutney or overzealous corset lacing. You sniff the tea. Smells like Earl Grey and despair. You dip your finger in just barely. Lukewarm, unsweetened. unlikely to kill unless consumed with particularly violent boredom. Next, the fruitcake. Dense, fragrant, studded with suspiciously green cherries. You break off a piece and examine it like a relic. It's dry enough to be considered a choking hazard in several counties. Gregory, who's joined you by now, peers over your shoulder. "You're not going to eat that, are you?" You shrug. You never know. He hands you a sandwich in silent solidarity. The cucumber cools your palate, grounds you, reminds you that not every mystery ends in handcuffs. Sometimes it ends in indigestion. Let's break the tension with a quirky tidbit. Victorian detectives often relied on doctors for cause of death determination, but many of those doctors were themselves operating on second-hand knowledge, half-remembered lectures, or family recipes for poultices that allegedly cured gout and summoned spiritual visions. There was one doctor, legend says, who tried to diagnose death by licking the victim's earlobe. He was later reassigned to pension paperwork. Back at the row house, you find something more interesting than the corpse a second teacup. In the sink, still warm, with a lipstick smudge. Ah. The greengrocer's widow, Mrs. Harbottle, insists she was in town during his demise. Buying lace, from a shop that closed 4 years ago. You gently press. She fidgets. Her hat slips. And out of her sleeve falls a second cucumber sandwich wrapped in lace-edged napkin. You both pause. "That wasn't meant to be there," she murmurs. You raise an eyebrow. "Was it meant for someone?" She crumbles, figuratively. The sandwich remains intact. "It was just tea," she confesses. "I didn't think he wasn't supposed to eat the fruitcake. It was from last Christmas." Gregory winces. That could kill a rhinoceros. In the end, no charges are filed. The doctor rules it. Death by natural causes, exacerbated by what he calls culinary negligence. You file it as case closed, no foul play, possible cake mismanagement. On the walk back, you and Gregory discuss the mechanics of polite murder. There's a theory, he says, that if someone dies with their shoes off, it's more likely they trusted the person they were with. You nod. And if they die holding a sandwich, he thinks, they probably just wanted a quiet afternoon. Which brings us to the question, historians still debate were Victorian detectives truly crime solvers, or simply grief counsellors with better boots. With low crime resolution rates and mountains of unsolved cases, some argue their main function was symbolic. A presence. A reassurance that someone was watching, even if that someone was mostly taking notes about furniture placement and damp sandwich wrappers. You disagree. Some days anyway. Because every now and then you do solve something. You see through a lie. You return a locket. You identify the murderer, or the mistaken widow, or the unfortunate cousin who just wanted to sell pigeons from the basement. And when you do, it feels enough. Later that night, you sit by the station fire. A fresh pot of tea warms your hands. Gregory dozes nearby, a sandwich resting like a pillow on his chest. You add the case to your files, scribble in your notebook, and think about Mrs. Harbottle the fruitcake, and the dangerous art of ignoring expiration dates. The station cat leaps up beside you, rubs its head against your sleeve, steals a bite of cucumber. You let it. Outside London yawns and exhales another breath of fog. Inside, all is still. Section 8. You're awoken before sunrise by a pounding at the station door, an urgent knock, rhythmic, and determined the kind that says someone is either reporting a crime or selling very serious biscuits. It's the Lord Mayor's assistant, soaked through and flustered, holding a velvet-trimmed folder, like it's made of eggshells. There's been a theft, he says. You sigh. There always is. You take the file still warm from his hands and skim the summary. Missing one Persian cat, prize winning last, seen reclining on a fringed cushion. Ah. So a proper emergency. You pack your coat, your notebook, and out of habit, a cucumber sandwich wrapped in oilcloth. You've got a long day ahead, and nothing fuels an emotionally fraught feline recovery mission like thinly sliced vegetables and barely there butter. The cat, it turns out, is named Madame Pompon. She lives in Mayfair in a townhouse with more curtains than furniture, and a butler who communicates exclusively through nose twitches. The lady of the house, Mrs. Everly Wooten, greets you in full mourning garb, although the only thing she seems to be mourning is the absence of drama. She vanished, she whispers, right after her lamb broth just floated off the cushion and into the ether. You blink. Do cats often float? She scowls. Madame Pompon was exceptionally graceful. Gregory arrives just in time to prevent you from responding. He carries a tin of sardines and the sleepy expression of someone who mistook today for his day off. You begin the investigation in the drawing room. The cushion in question is circular brocaded and takes up more floor space than most rural kitchens. There are 3 strands of white fur and a tiny clawed glove lying beside it. Decorative functional. You hesitate to ask. Let's ground this with a historical truth. The Victorian era was deeply obsessed with pets, particularly among the upper classes. Cats previously seen as vermin control were elevated to companions. They were given names, wardrobes, diets, and in some cases pensions. There was even a Royal Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals with specific guidelines on feline etiquette, and yes, people left inheritances to cats. Several, in fact. So Madame Pompon's disappearance. It's not just a loss, it's a potential scandal. Mrs. Everly Wooten shows you a note found under the cushion. She is needed elsewhere. Think fondly of the fluff. Gregory holds it up to the light. Smells like lavender. Someone dramatic wrote this. You both suspect the butler. He blinks at you from under brows the size of ferrets and says nothing. You tour the house. Bedroom, library, solarium. A corridor entirely dedicated to teapots. Nothing. No cat. No signs of struggle. Just an increasing number of lace doilies. You step into the garden. It's overgrown, moody. A small gate leads to the mews where servants gossip and smoke behind crates of coal. You approach a stable boy, offer him half your sandwich. He accepts, solemnly takes a bite, and then points wordlessly toward a side building. Inside the laundry room. And in it, atop a pile of monogrammed pillowcases, is Madame Pompon, curled, smug, and blinking as if to say, "What took you so long?" She stands, stretches, leaps gracefully into your arms, smells faintly of starch. Back at the townhouse, Mrs. Everly Wooten bursts into tears, then laughter, then insists on serving you celebratory sandwiches, which are cucumber of course, but crusted in edible gold. You take a bite. It crunches like regret. Gregory wraps his in a napkin and pockets it. For the cat, he says. You suspect otherwise. Here's your quirky tidbit. In 18s, the Earl of Dunstable reportedly built a miniature chaise lounge specifically for his cat's digestive comfort. It was upholstered in imported silk and occasionally occupied by guests who did not understand scale. Also true, several detectives kept notebooks just for pet cases. The margins were filled with doodles of paw prints, collars, and in one case, an extremely fat parrot named Duchess Clara. Back at the station, you log the case under resolved, feline relocation voluntary. You include a sketch of the ransom note and a note that Madame Pompon is notorious for independent wanderings. Scholars still argue whether cases like these were distractions from real crime or a form of subtle social management. Some say the detectives acted as buffers, absorbing anxieties, maintaining decorum, making the upper classes feel attended to. Others argue it gave real criminals room to thrive, while lawmen chased cats and questioned butlers about sardines. You're not sure. But you do know this when the city is quiet, when the fog drapes itself like velvet over rooftops, when all the murderers are sleeping and the pickpockets are off duty, there's something oddly satisfying about finding a missing cat. You sit at your desk. Madame Pompon's hair clings to your coat. Your sandwich is gone. The station cat sniffs your pockets with new interest. Gregory leans over. You think she really wrote that note? You glance at him. She wears gloves. Anything's possible. Section 9. The rain turns heavier by midweek, and with it comes a fresh case. This time involving disguises an amateur stage troupe, and a moustache that might be sentient. You find yourself once again trudging through the mud, slick alleys behind Fleet Street, where your boots suction to the cobbles, and every lantern flicker feels vaguely suspicious. The letter that started it all was delivered by a boy in costume, a page boy's uniform 10 sizes too big. No return address, just a scrawled note inside. There is a man impersonating my husband. He eats sardines. Harold hates sardines. You stare at the note for a long time, then take a contemplative bite of your cucumber sandwich. The sandwich at least is trustworthy. The cucumbers crisp the bread, trimmed to architectural precision. Your companion today is Constable Bellamy, a well-meaning man with the deductive skills of a half-asleep umbrella. Still, he carries a map and knows where to find warm tea, so you tolerate him. You head to the address listed in the note, a respectable terraced home in a quieter part of town, the kind of place where the gas lamps are brighter and the hedges trimmed with almost military discipline. Mrs. Enid Blythe answers the door in a whirl of lace and suspicion. He says he's Harold, she tells you, ushering you in, but Harold has a mole on his left elbow and snores in German. You blink. German? She nods solemnly. His mother was from Stuttgart. You're led into the sitting room where Harold is reading the evening paper and sipping tea with an air of unfounded confidence. He sees you stand and offers a handshake. You inspect him, stiff collar, polished boots, and yes, a meticulously trimmed moustache that looks like it could deliver sermons. I hear there's been some confusion, he says, smiling. Just a smidge, you reply, taking a seat, and accepting the tea he pours for you. No sandwich, unforgivable. Now here's the historical context. Disguises in the Victorian criminal world were a well-known tactic. Without photographs or ID cards, one could vanish and reappear simply by adjusting one's hat, altering a gait, or growing facial hair. Some criminals maintained full wardrobes of identities, coats of different cuts, accents borrowed from boarding schools or taverns, and crucially moustaches. There's even a story which Gregory swears is true of a jewel thief who maintained 6 identities each with a matching moustache kept in a labelled velvet pouch. You ask Harold a few questions about his wedding day, his favourite pudding, the cat's name. He answers easily, almost too easily. But when Mrs. Blythe brings out a plate of sardine toast, he digs in with gusto. The real Harold, you learn, would sooner eat coal. You thank them both and excuse yourself to the garden under the pretence of checking for chimney access. Bellamy follows, chewing on a licorice root and whistling off-key. Outside, you consult your notes. The handwriting from the letter and this Harold's do not match. His accent leans East London, not Stuttgart, and he blinked just slightly when asked about the cat. There's a theory among detectives, the blink after a cat question. It's not scientific, but reliable. Cats, after all, are hard to fake a relationship with. They don't tolerate imposters. You loop back now with purpose. You excuse Mrs. Blythe and confront the man. Your moustache, you say casually, is French. He stiffens. You use wax that only imports from Lyon. Costs 3 shillings a tin. Smells faintly of violets. He opens his mouth, closes it. You continue. Your handwriting doesn't match the letter Harold wrote in 63, kept in the registry of St. Basil's if I'm not mistaken. And your cat hasn't let you pet it once. He bolts, not very far. Bellamy, against all odds, trips him with the grace of an uncoordinated gazelle. You find yourself pressing one well-polished boot atop a now askew moustache, as the imposter whimpers something about just wanting to experience a stable marriage. The real Harold is eventually found vacationing without permission in Bath. A case of mutual abandonment, it seems, with each party hoping the other wouldn't notice. You filed a report under resolved domestic disguise, motive better meals. Back at the station, Bellamy offers you a cucumber sandwich from his own tin. It's slightly squashed, the butter uneven. You accept it anyway, respect. Quirky detail. There was once a detective who refused to wear disguises but did carry 5 different monocles to help him change his aura. His name was Percival Figg, and he solved crimes purely by pretending to be more educated than everyone else in the room. Meanwhile, scholars still debate whether Victorian disguises were as effective as fiction suggests. Some argue the general grime and chaos of the city made it easier to disappear in plain sight. Others say these tales are exaggerated, romanticised by penny dreadfuls and embellished memoirs. But you've seen it. Men who change their hair, they'll walk their wives. All in the hope of outrunning a past that usually catches up slowly, inevitably, like a suspicious sandwich left too long in the sun. Gregory, now awake, reads the report and nods. You think Mrs. Blythe really couldn't tell? You shrug. Maybe she could. Maybe she just wanted someone to like sardines. Outside, the city settles. Lamps hiss. Rain taps. Somewhere a false moustache lies forgotten on a windowsill. Inside, your sandwich is gone. The tea has gone cold again. And tomorrow promises something far less dramatic. Perhaps a haunted potato. Section 10. It begins as many days do with paperwork. Endless, whisper-thin pages of it, most of them damp in the corners and curling like suspicious leaves. You sit at your desk, dipping a squeaky-nibbed pen into an inkwell, with the reluctant energy of a man writing his own mildly tedious obituary. The station cat stretches across your blotter. You move him gently, then more firmly, then simply right around him. Gregory drops into the seat opposite you with a sigh that nearly knocks over his tea. 4 reports this morning, he grumbles. 3 complaints, 1 love letter. All in the same envelope. You nod. That tracks. Your first entry reads, Case number 1407, stolen wheelbarrow. Prime suspect neighbour. Motive revenge garden. And then the real challenge arrives not outside, not by telegram, but in your hand, a pocket watch, silver, ornate, tickless. It was found near a crime scene, well near a bakery with rumours of arson, which turned out to be a small oven fire caused by an over-ambitious crumpet. Still, the watch is curious. Heavy, etched with a small R. And inside, a miniature drawing of a woman's face, and a torn receipt for lemon soap. You write this down, then glance at the station clock. It's off by 7 minutes. Bellamy wanders by, sees the pocket watch, and mutters, Time's always the first thing to go in an investigation. Poetic, unhelpful. You sip lukewarm tea, take a bite of your now slightly stale cucumber sandwich, and ponder. The sandwich still holds structure barely. The cucumber is softer than usual, the butter retreating from the crust like a disappointed tenant. It's not glorious, but it's edible, and more importantly, it marks the hour sandwich time. Somewhere between second breakfast and pre-crime nap. Here's your historical context for the day Victorian detectives were expected to maintain ledgers for every single case, regardless of size. These were not typed. They were handwritten long form, with entries including weather mood, suspect height, facial hair notes, and any irregularities in punctuation found in suspicious letters. Entire afternoons were swallowed by ink and estimation. Some detectives grew poetic with their reports, others used shorthand symbols. One famous case involved a ledger found years later that was entirely coded in symbols of teacups, fish and umbrellas. Scholars still debate whether it was encrypted or just the work of a man slowly unravelling. You stand and stretch. The station smells faintly of ink and boiled socks. Time to clear your head. You take a short walk to the evidence room, Well, cupboard is more accurate. A dark cramped space, filled with old shoes, mislabelled buttons, one umbrella containing 3 layers of secrets, and something that might be a pineapple preserved in a jar. You don't ask. You place the pocket watch in an envelope, seal it, and file it in a drawer labelled Temporal Mysteries. Gregory has also returned to his paperwork, head in one hand, pen in the other. You know what this job is really, he says. You wait. It's matchmaking, not people evidence. We just marry bits of nonsense until something clicks. You nod, and sometimes they divorce before the trial. He grunts, especially the umbrella cases. Here's a curious tidbit. Some Victorian detectives, bored with paperwork and worn down by repetitive cases, began creating phantom suspects in their ledgers. Imaginary figures who never quite committed a crime but seemed to hover near them. Names like Thaddeus Grimble or Mrs. Featherwig. Not as jokes, more like placeholders. Emotional scapegoats for unfinished business. You might have done the same once or twice. Your own phantom is a gentleman thief with excellent manners and a suspicious fondness for rhubarb. He's never technically committed a crime, but he's always nearby when the evidence is ambiguous. You even leave small sandwich crusts in his name. Back to your own phantom, the woman in the watch. You take another look. She's wearing a brooch shaped like a sparrow. Not a common piece. You make a note. Maybe tomorrow someone will report a missing timepiece. Or a bakery will mysteriously burn itself down again. The hours slip past. The station grows quiet. Bellamy hums something that might be a lullaby or a warning. Gregory has begun whittling a pencil into a shape that vaguely resembles a sad turnip. Historians still debate whether Victorian police paperwork contributed to actual justice or simply acted as a form of social record keeping. Was the detective's true function to chase criminals or to document human absurdity with decorum and ink smudges? You tend toward the latter. As the afternoon slips into something dust-coloured, you pack your things. Notebook, pen, pocket watch, still unsolved, and your final cucumber sandwich of the day. It's slightly crushed, but familiar, comforting. Like an old friend who never speaks but always shows up on time, Gregory joins you at the door. Anything interesting? You hold up the watch. Could be. He nods. Or could just be someone forgot what time it was. Don't we all, you say, and together you step into the misting evening sandwich crumbs on your coat, time ticking or not ticking in your pocket. London exhales around you, a city of gaslight and guesses. And somewhere another report is already being written. Section 11. A loud crash greets you at the station before you've even removed your hat. Not the kind of crash that signals danger, mind you, just the unmistakable clatter of filing cabinets surrendering to gravity. Again. You find Bellamy half buried in a cascade of forms and folders, wearing a look of mild betrayal, as if the cabinet had promised it wouldn't do this today. Rivalry case, he announces from the floor, holding up a sheet with a coffee ring the size of a crumpet. 2 detectives, 1 pie contest, and an accusation of sabotage. You pinch the bridge of your nose. Back in your early days, you were warned about internal tensions, small frictions among the men at Scotland Yard that could spark into full-blown rivalries. But no one told you those rivalries would involve so many scones. The 2 detectives in question, Larch and Pym. Both veterans, both stubborn, both with oddly specific theories on pastry crust. The contest itself had started innocently, a charity event for a local orphanage. Pies were baked, judged, and consumed. But when Larch's rhubarb pie went mysteriously missing from the judging table, only to reappear on Pym's plate, mid-tasting, a formal inquiry was demanded. So here you are investigating dessert-related deception. You find Larch in the evidence room cupboard, fuming quietly and sketching out what appears to be a pie-based crime scene diagram. A splatter of jam marked as entry point A, and a suspicious crumb trail labelled likely escape route. I don't want an apology, he says. I want a confession, and possibly a lemon tart. Pym, by contrast, is calm. too calm. Sitting at his desk, whistling a suspiciously cheery tune, and eating a cucumber sandwich with deliberate smugness. You can't prove anything yet, but that sandwich looks victorious. You start interviewing witnesses, other officers, event volunteers, the orphanage matron, who claims to have seen a hand, a cloth napkin, and a swirl of rhubarb. Gregory, as always, accompanies you. He's assigned himself the role of neutral palate, and insists on sampling remaining pie fragments for continuity. Here's a mainstream historical truth to chew on. Scotland Yard's early years were rife with tension between uniformed officers and the plainclothes detectives. The detectives, seen as aloof and secretive, were often accused of arrogance, while uniformed men felt overworked and underappreciated. Disagreements were common, and more than one senior officer had to break up disputes, involving everything from evidence protocols to who got the last slice of fruitcake at staff teas. But this is more personal. It's not just about the pie, it's about dignity, about reputation, about who owns the moral high ground, sprinkled with sugar and slightly overbaked. And the quirky detail, some detectives began writing semi-fictional accounts of their rivalries in their personal ledgers, changing names slightly but including vivid culinary metaphors. One entry you once read included the line, "He crept into the pantry like a cat on clotted cream, whiskered and without shame." Back to the investigation. You examine the pie tin. Slightly bent, smells faintly of thyme and regret. There's a smear of jam on the underside, and a single dog hair which leads you to the real breakthrough. Neither Larch nor Pym owns a dog, but the station janitor does. A shaggy mutt named Clarence, known for stealing biscuits, and once briefly listed as a suspect in a missing bangers case. You corner Clarence near the coal chute. He looks guilty. You look stern. Then you realise Clarence is currently gnawing on the remains of the rhubarb pie behind a crate of forgotten hats. You sigh. Another mystery solved by a sandwich-loving sleuth and a jam-addicted terrier. You return the evidence, or what's left of it, and present your findings. Larch accepts the verdict with the dignity of a man who still believes in justice, even if it's sticky. Pym, to his credit, offers Larch half of his current sandwich. Larch declines. "I don't eat with thieves," he says, then pauses. "Unless it's apple." You log the case as case resolved. Culinary rivalry. Culprit canine. Consequence mild, indigestion. Scholars continue to debate whether these internal squabbles hindered early detective work or served as much needed pressure release valves. Some say they undermined authority. Others argue they built camaraderie through absurdity. You believe a man who's fought over pie will die for you in a tight alley, so long as you share your cucumber sandwich first. Gregory finishes his notes, then pulls a slightly warm sandwich from his coat. To peaceful resolution he toasts. You clink sandwiches like swords. Eat in silence. Outside the fog creeps low along the gutters. Inside, justice has been served. A bit undercooked, but serviceable. And somewhere down the hall, Clarence burps gently. Section 12. You've barely settled back into your chair when a new case slides across your desk, literally as if propelled by fate or someone with buttered fingers. It's marked with a smudge of ink, a curl of tea steam, and the briefest note, stolen map of London. Annotated in red thread. You blink. Then turn the paper over looking for more. That's it. No address, no signature. Just a mystery about a missing map, an intriguingly thread. Gregory peers over your shoulder. Could be an art student, he muses. Or a murderer. With impeccable needlework, you grab your coat and a sandwich and follow the trail, or at least the lack of one. Your first stop is the Cartographic Society, a place that smells like linen glue, and the weight of 10,000 carefully drawn rivers. Inside, you're greeted by Mr. Blenkinsop, a man whose beard appears to predate most municipal road systems. A theft, he exclaims. Here unthinkable, scandalous. Also probably my fault. He ushers you into the archive room, where rolls of city maps are stacked like pastry logs and pinned with colour-coded ribbons. He points to an empty slot. Map of Central London, annotated by Miss Priscilla Thorne, amateur historian and enthusiastic embroiderer. She said the thread helped her connect the city's hidden energies. You nod. Of course she did. Miss Thorne's flat is just above a stationery shop, the sort of place where everyone owns a magnifying glass, and most things are labelled in calligraphy. She welcomes you in with an anxious smile, offers tea, and gestures toward a table covered in fabric scraps, city guides, and two sleepy ferrets named Milton and Gravy. The map vanished. Yesterday, she says. I left it by the window, and when I returned, only the thumbtacks were left behind. You glance around. Windows slightly open. No signs of forced entry. But you do spot a faint trail, tiny red threads snagged on the edges of furniture. You think someone stole it for the annotations, Gregory asks, picking up a spool and sniffing it. Smells like cinnamon. Miss Thorne nods. The threads trace rumoured crime locations from the last 50 years. I colour-coded by motive. Of course she did. Here's a historical detail to stitch into the fabric of this tale. Crime mapping, even in rudimentary forms, was used by some early detectives to identify patterns. It wasn't official practice, not yet, but some sleuths kept personal wall maps with coloured pins, chalk marks, or bits of string tracking everything from pickpocketing hotspots to where particularly loud goats lived. The threads, it turns out, led somewhere. Out the window, across the rooftop, into the building opposite the Gentlemen's Club, for amateur philosophers known colloquially as the Wafflers. You and Gregory slip in, greeted by a sea of mahogany cigars and arguments about the nature of clouds. Mapper member says when questioned. Oh yes, that strange young fellow took it to the basement. Claimed it revealed the vascular system of the city's unconscious. You exchange glances. This again, Gregory mutters. You descend into the basement sandwich still in hand. The room is lined with velvet drapes and the muffled ticking of 6 mismatched clocks. In the centre stands a young man, gesturing wildly at the map, now pinned across 3 tables with the red thread forming what looks suspiciously like a seahorse. Do you live here, you ask? Only spiritually, he replies. You blink. Gregory sighs. Turns out the map was not stolen, it was borrowed. Misunderstood. Temporarily reassigned to the service of abstract cartographic performance. The young man meant no harm. He was just following the thread. Miss Thorne, upon its return, forgives everything. She even offers to embroider his next theory in green silk. You log the case as resolved. Misplaced artistic artifact. Motive metaphysical curiosity. No charges. As you write, a red thread clings to your cuff like a souvenir. Now for a quirky detail, some detectives used scraps of fabric string and chalk, not just for mapping, but for calming themselves. Repetitive gestures. Order from chaos. One particularly anxious officer kept a velvet pouch of buttons arranged by colour and weight. Said it helped him think clearly about moral ambiguity. Historians still debate whether early crime mapping helped reduce crime or simply made it easier to feel in control. A sort of illusionary geometry connecting incidents across time and place with the confidence of someone who never misplaces their gloves. Back at the station, you pin the red thread on your board, your own quiet collection of strangeness. Beside it, a list of umbrella thefts, 3 sketches of boot treads, and a cartoon of Gregory asleep on a bench. The rain continues outside. Persistent. Predictable. You unwrap the last bite of your sandwich. A little damp from coat heat. Still edible. Still blandly reassuring. Gregory hands you a new map. Want to thread this one, you consider. Nods. Blue for confusing, you say. He smiles. We'll need a lot of thread. Section 13. You find yourself once again in a parlour that smells like dust and rose water, listening carefully, as a maid insists that a ghost is responsible for the theft of Lady Spindlewick's pearl brooch. Floated clean off the dressing table, she says, eyes wide. Just rose up and vanished. Gregory scribbles something in his notebook. You hope its suspect is probably not a ghost. You sip lukewarm tea from a chipped cup and quietly unwrap a cucumber sandwich. The maid eyes it enviously. You eat those voluntarily, she asks. Helps with the ghosts, you reply. The truth is, this is your third ghost theft this month. And in every case, the spectral culprit turned out to have an alibi that involved stairs, sneakiness, and occasionally a disgruntled footman with excellent lock-picking skills. This time the suspect is subtler. Lady Spindlewick is currently at the theatre. The staff consists of 4 maids, a footman with suspiciously clean fingernails, and most promisingly, a butler named Mr. Hatch, who has the expression of someone who never forgets a slight or a salad fork. You request a tour of the room in question. The maid, still eyeing your sandwich like it might confess something, leads you upstairs. The brooch was last seen on a blue velvet cushion beneath a lace doily under a glass dome. Unsurprisingly, the dome is intact, the cushion fluffed, and the brooch nowhere to be found. You examine the room. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Victorian households were run with the precision of a pocket watch, but beneath the polish and structure tension simmered. Servants knew everything. Secrets, debts, romances, and detectives often relied on them as sources of information, if not outright confession. Which brings you to today's quirky detail. Some butlers kept informal journals of their employers' habits, not out of loyalty but leverage. More than one case has been solved because a butler remembered precisely when Lady So-and-so skipped her usual 3 o'clock sherry. Mr. Hatch, when questioned, insists on his innocence, offers you tea, offers you curiously a cucumber sandwich. You decline. Gregory leans in. Too much symmetry, he murmurs. If the butler offers you a cucumber sandwich, something's off. You take a closer look around the room. One detail stands out, the windows open. Only slightly, but enough to let in a breeze. And on the windowsill, a smudge of shoe polish. Expensive, glossy, definitely not standard footman issue. You track the polish just a faint streak down the hallway. Into the pantry, out the service door, and there, in the alley, beneath a stack of empty vegetable crates, is the brooch, tucked inside a folded napkin embroidered with the Spindlewick crest. Not a ghost, just a plan gone wrong. You confront Mr. Hatch. He sighs, smooths his jacket. I wasn't going to take it, he says. Just misplace it. A reminder to Lady Spindlewick that I'm still here. She hasn't spoken to me directly in 3 months. Gregory mutters. That's more tragic than criminal. You return the brooch. You return the bidus. Leave the lecture to Lady Spindlewick, who you suspect will not find the matter nearly as poetic. Back at the station, you log the case resolved. Emotional larceny. Motive, invisible employment. No charges filed. The sandwich, now slightly squashed, is still in your pocket. You finally eat it, grateful for something bland after the emotional melodrama of a brooch-based haunting. Gregory sits beside you, flipping through the Gazette. Says here a man in Wapping thinks his cow is telepathic. You nod. Probably wants to report a stolen milk bucket. Or a ghost cow. You sigh. You really want a ghost case, don't you? I'm just saying, Gregory says. If a ghost ever does commit a crime, we're not ready. Scholars continue to argue whether Victorian domestic staff were more often the victims or quiet manipulators of the elite households they served. The truth likely lies somewhere between the silver tray and the locked pantry door. Either way, you know this. In most houses, the servants see everything. They know who comes in, who sneaks out, and who steals a brooch to remind the world that they exist. You add a new entry to your notebook, suspicion ghost. Outcome sandwich, then close it with a snap. The station is quiet now. The cat sleeps on your chair. The fire is down to embers. Outside, the rain finally stops. Not a dramatic end just a gentle sigh from the clouds. And inside you rest, your coat on the hook, your sandwich gone, your watch ticking softly into the night. Section 14. You wake early. The air is damp again, tinged with coal smoke, and whatever scent the tanneries are currently exhaling. It's a good morning for secrets. Also a good morning for sandwiches, of which you've packed 2, one standard cucumber. The other, an experimental addition involving watercress and crushed mint that Gregory has ominously named the bold mistake. At the station, a new file awaits. Slim, almost elegant. A single line across the top, in crisp, looping script, concerning cucumbers' espionage and the ambassador's tea. You raise an eyebrow. Gregory, now chewing what appears to be a pencil, looks over your shoulder. Cucumber conspiracy, he murmurs. Told you that sandwich had secrets. The case, oddly enough, originates not in Whitechapel or Soho, but in Belgravia, where the streets are clean, the doors are shiny, and everyone acts like nothing bad ever happens unless it's mentioned in the Times. You arrive at the ambassador's residence, a cream-coloured mansion with ferns in the windows and servants who glide more than walk. You're led into a drawing room where a man in a velvet smoking jacket greets you with a smile and a biscuit. The cucumber, he says gravely, was the wrong temperature. You blink. He continues. At yesterday's diplomatic tea, the sandwiches were warm, slightly, only the cucumber ones, which means someone accessed the kitchen, someone not scheduled. And shortly thereafter, Lady Thistlewaite's pearls were missing. You pause mid-note, so we're connecting warm cucumbers with jewel theft. He leans in. Coincidence is for the French. Let's ground this with a historical curiosity. In Victorian high society, the quality of a cucumber sandwich was no small matter. Servants were trained to slice cucumbers precisely thin enough to fold without breaking. Bread was kept chilled until serving. Butter temperature was considered a character test, so a warm cucumber sandwich wasn't just an affront, it was a coded insult. Or, as the ambassador suggests a distraction, you and Gregory request to speak with the kitchen staff. The head cook is indignant. We've never served warm sandwiches in this house. Even during the Great Jelly Incident of 61. You believe her. One footman, however, fidgets under questioning. He's new. His references check out mostly, but his shoes are polished too well. And his lunchbox empty. Too empty. Gregory makes the call. Let's check his quarters. Inside his locker, you find a sandwich. Not cucumber. Not even buttered. Brie and fig. You both stare at it for a long moment. A foreign agent, Gregory whispers. The footman confesses with little struggle. He was hired under false pretenses, paid to observe, not steal, not harm, just watch, make notes, memorise guest lists, occasionally tamper with the tea schedule. The pearls. A separate incident. Lady Thistlewaite had simply forgotten them in her other handbag, which was still at the opera. You report your findings. The ambassador is simultaneously relieved and insulted. A spy, he says, exhaling, using sandwiches as signals. It's worse than I feared. You try to explain that the sandwich was incidental. He waves you off. I always suspected the French of over-flavouring, he mutters. You file the case as resolved. Espionage via lunchroom, motive information gathering, outcome, Brie intercepted. Here's a quirky historical tidbit to finish the crust with. During certain high-profile events, actual sandwich testers were employed, usually junior staff, who sampled the food ahead of the nobility to ensure temperature, texture, and non-lethality. It was considered both a privilege and a punishment. You and Gregory sit on a bench just outside the embassy. He unwraps the bold mistake, takes a bite, pauses. This, he says, slowly tastes like soap and ambition. You accept your own cucumber triangle with new respect. Its blandness is comforting, predictable, the culinary equivalent of a trustworthy colleague who never forgets his gloves. Scholars still argue whether such culinary peculiarities were genuine attempts at social diplomacy or simply manifestations of class anxiety. Was the cucumber sandwich an edible mask, tastefully plain whispering gentility in every bite? Or was it a subtle weapon used to maintain status signal precision and intimidate the unflavoured masses? You're not sure. But you do know this, in a world where secrets ride in tea trolleys and confessions hide behind parsley sprigs. Sometimes it really is about the sandwich. You brush the crumbs from your lap and stand. Gregory does the same. A breeze stirs the ivy. Somewhere a bell tolls noon, and you head back to the station, ready to log one more curious case in your ever-growing ledger of absurd truths and gently unravelling logic. Section 15. The day ends much as it began, with a dull rattle of rain against the window, and the quiet shuffle of paper from one neglected corner of your desk to another. The light in the office has gone golden and low, casting everything in the forgiving glow of almost evening. You've just sat down with the second half of your final sandwich slightly damp, slightly more cucumber than bread, when the final file of the day arrives. It's hand-delivered. No envelope, just a note pinned to a small velvet pouch with a pearl-topped hat pin. The borrowed casebook. Returned almost. See ledger notes. You'll know where to look. You sigh. You hate riddles. Gregory, who's sorting a stack of paperclips by moral alignment, looks up. That from Pym. You nod. Pym again. The man has a talent for creating confusion, then apologising with more confusion. He once borrowed your notebook to sketch a diagram of criminal shoe sizes, then left it in a bakery behind a stack of jam rolls. The pouch, when opened, contains a small metal key and a lock of hair wrapped in wax paper. Human, by the looks of it. Blonde, probably clean. You hope. The ledger note, once you track it down, is classic Pym page 74. Not that 74, the other one. The one with the ink blot that looks like a suspicious duck. Eventually you find it. A reference to an old unsolved case. A missing violinist. A bag of turnips, and a broken monocle. The official record ends abruptly with the word ambiguous scribbled across the margin. But now tucked behind the page you find a new entry. Recent. Pym's handwriting. It's a confession. Not of guilt, but of defeat. She wasn't missing, just hiding. From applause. Said it felt too much like grief. You read it twice. You closed the book. Sometimes a case isn't about crime, it's about absence. And the quiet ways people slip through the world, hoping not to be noticed until someone starts asking questions. Here's your final quirky detail. Some detectives, especially those who stayed in the job too long, kept hidden files, cases they couldn't solve, couldn't forget, couldn't quite explain. These weren't marked as failures, they were marked incomplete. The Victorian idea of justice didn't always mean resolution. Sometimes it just meant remembering. Gregory appears beside you. That it for today. You nod. He hands you the station ledger. The day's entries are mundane. Lost watch. Returned before report filed. Suspected haunted umbrella. Determined to be a goose. 2 cucumber sandwiches missing from canteen. Possible internal dispute. You log your final note of the day, casebook returned. Clarity, partially achieved. The cat hops onto your desk, settling in like punctuation. You lean back, exhale, and feel the strange weight of 100 small oddities sitting gently on your shoulders. Historians still argue whether any of it mattered, whether the soft churn of minor mysteries added up to anything more than footnotes and footpaths. Whether detectives like you changed anything or simply chronicled the shifting fog one sandwich at a time. But you know the truth, sometimes the fog is the point. It wraps around the questions, softens the facts, gives you space to breathe between notes. And speaking of breathing, You close the casebook with a quiet thump. Outside, the city has begun to whisper itself to sleep. Windows shuttering, carriage wheels slowing, boots splashing less often against the stones. The gas lamps flicker gently in the gathering dark, each one casting a buttery halo into the mist. Your chair creaks as you lean back. The sandwich is gone now. Only crumbs remain, and they're welcome to the cat. Gregory's already dozed off, hat tilted over one eye, the pen still perched between his fingers like a flag of surrender. You leave him be. Everyone deserves one last nap before the night takes over. Your mind wanders not to cases, but to texture of cloth, of paper, of bread. The soft hush of a well-cut sandwich. The flick of pages turn slowly. The polite click of boots stepping respectfully over a question never answered. Section 1. You are unrolling a hand-painted scroll, smoothing it gently beneath your fingertips, and settling into the flickering lamplight of a courtyard where the pines sway, the incense drifts, and a suspiciously smug scholar prepares to crush you in a game with rules no one actually understands. You're dressed in silk robes that are definitely too long in the sleeves. The tea has gone lukewarm again, and the air hums with soft lute music and distant cricket song. You of course have no idea how this game works. And honestly, you probably won't survive this. Not without accidentally disrespecting your host, losing all your jade tokens, and possibly forfeiting your career prospects in the process. You're in the Han Dynasty, let's say around 150 BCE. You're invited to an evening gathering at the home of a mid-level magistrate who wants to show off his new lacquered game set, carved bone counters, an inked wooden board with strange grooves, and 2 finely painted dice shaped like little black turtles. He calls it Liubo, but honestly you just call it confusing. A servant brings more tea. Someone's lute string breaks mid-song. You're introduced to the game, but the explanation is vague, mostly consisting of, you'll pick it up as we go. You won't. Still you sit. The rules seem to involve moving counters along the board's X-shaped paths, occasionally placing something into a central square, and maybe, just maybe, casting the dice when someone sighs loudly. A scholar across from you taps a bone piece like he's performing surgery. He nods sagely. You nod back. You both have no idea what's happening. Mainstream history agrees on one point: Liubo was wildly popular among the Han elite. It shows up in paintings, poems, even on burial goods. Some tombs included full game sets, presumably for afterlife leisure. But what exactly the players were doing? That's where things fall apart. Historians still argue whether Liubo was primarily a gambling game, a spiritual ritual, or a kind of abstract strategy game designed to reinforce social hierarchy and make you feel bad about your intellect. Some think it was played competitively. Others believe it was used more like a ceremonial pastime, full of symbolic gestures and metaphors no one bothered to write down. You glance across the table. Your host is explaining how the dice correspond to heavenly directions, and how your jade piece is currently trapped in the sorrow corner. That sounds made up. But then again, so does most of this game. Here's a fun tidbit. Some scholars think Liubo was intentionally esoteric, meant to be difficult to learn unless you were in the know. An intellectual gatekeeping mechanism. Not unlike how some modern strategy games require reading a 40-page rulebook and knowing what the expansion packs do before you even place your first token. Meanwhile, the evening drifts onward. The torches sputter. Someone offers fruit slices. You place a piece onto a triangle, and your host nods approvingly. Did you win? Did you lose? Did you just insult his ancestors? No one tells you. But your host gives you a gift scroll before you leave, so you're either honoured or exiled. It's unclear. The truth is, most early Chinese board games weren't about winning or losing in the modern sense. They were about etiquette, subtlety, and the graceful passage of time. You weren't there to crush opponents. You were there to be seen to be composed, and to demonstrate the kind of thoughtful restraint that made you a desirable dinner guest and an acceptable candidate for bureaucratic service. As you shuffle home, under a waxy moon game board, still echoing in your mind, you realise something. You still don't know the rules. But you understand the performance, the way the game moved like a poem, the way your host chuckled when your piece landed in Misfortune River. Maybe the point wasn't to understand. Maybe it was just to sit still, choose slowly, and pretend. You fold the memory into your sleeve like a letter. Another long, strange evening. Another game half played. Section 2. You wake up late the next morning to the faint scent of dried ink and sandalwood, a sore neck from sleeping on your arm, and the memory of last night's game flickering through your mind like a badly edited scroll. Liubo, you still have no idea what happened, but now you're determined to figure it out. Which brings you to a tiny room inside a public library, hunched over brittle bamboo slips and faded rubbings from Han Dynasty tomb murals. The word Liubo appears again and again, always paired with beautifully drawn diagrams that look more like abstract art than anything resembling gameplay instructions. One image shows a board divided into a symmetrical cross shape, with animals in the corners and a strange pattern of dots at the centre. Another depicts two noblemen, identical top knots, long sleeves flowing locked in what appears to be an intense stare-off, each hovering a hand dramatically above a square. One of them has a wine jug next to him. Of course he does. That's when you realise you're not the only one who doesn't get this game. Scholars, archaeologists, amateur board game enthusiasts, they've all been trying to figure it out for centuries. Here's the mainstream fact of the day. Liubo was the most popular board game in early China from at least the Warring States period around 400 BCE through the Han Dynasty. It appears in texts, tomb art, and even poetry. People referenced it the way modern writers reference chess, or Sudoku, or whatever game they're secretly bad at. But the exact rules totally lost. One theory popular among those who enjoy being endlessly confused suggests that Liubo involved 5 playing pieces per player, each moved based on a combination of dice rolls and symbolic actions. Some diagrams suggest the board mimicked the layout of the cosmos, a microcosm of celestial forces, where every move was less about tactics and more about aligning with divine order. You imagine trying to explain this to a modern tabletop gamer. Well, you roll dice to determine spiritual alignment, and then place a jade rabbit in the river of chaos. Unless your opponent blocks you with a phoenix feather. Got it. What's the win condition? You become a better person. Oh, quirky detail. Time in one tomb mural. A ghostly figure hovers above a Liubo board, possibly playing against a spirit. Some believe the game had religious or mystical undertones used to predict the future or communicate with the dead. Whether that's true or just artistic flair, no one agrees. And yes, historians still argue whether the game was ever truly meant to be played in a modern sense. Some posit that it was more of a symbolic performance, like tea ceremonies or flower arrangement contests, part game, part theatre, part spiritual metaphor. Others argue that the rules were simply passed down orally, and when the last generation forgot them, the entire thing became an unsolvable riddle. Like your uncle's taxes. You flip to another rubbing. This one shows what might be a referee, an older man holding a stick and frowning, standing between two players. Judging them. Keeping score, enforcing rules, or just trying to remember who brought the wine. We'll never know. Still, you're getting a feel for it now. Not the gameplay, no. That would be too helpful. But the mood, the tone. Liubo was slow, deliberate, cryptic. The kind of game that made you feel clever just for sitting at the board even if you had no idea what was happening. It reminds you of those times when conversation flows best during a game. When the focus shifts just enough to let secrets slip out. Maybe Liubo was like that. A social lubricant disguised as a dice and tokens mystery. You picture 2 ancient officials' robes draped leaning over the board with polite intensity. One of them murmurs something about the stars aligning. The other counters by placing a piece into the Great Wind Zone. No one reacts. A servant refills their tea. A poet nearby scribbles a line. He fell in fortune's lap, but moved too soon. You exhale. There's something deeply peaceful about trying to learn a game that no one can teach you, like being part of a joke that's lasted 2,000 years. So you close the bamboo slips, roll up the rubbing, and walk back out into the pale light of the courtyard, where pigeons circle and vendors call out things you can't quite afford. You carry the mystery with you, not heavier, but quieter now, and in your sleeve pocket, a single crustless cucumber sandwich. Because some things never change. Section 3. You're sitting on a low, wooden stool at a tea house now, knees stiff from too much walking, and your mind still looping over the enigma of Lubo. But this place has a different energy, quieter, more focused. In the corner, 2 elderly scholars are hunched over a smooth, grid-marked board, with 2 bowls beside them, each filled with polished black and white stones. No dice. No bone pieces shaped like mythological animals. Just dots and stones and silence so complete it might as well be a meditation hall. You've stumbled into a game of Wei Qi, or, as it's more widely known today, Go. At first glance, it seems deceptively simple. You take turns placing stones on the intersections of the grid. Once placed, the stones don't move. The goal is to claim territory, to surround and control more of the board than your opponent. Easy right, not remotely. The old man playing white lifts a stone with the delicacy of a man about to perform surgery. He sets it down. The other nods slightly and responds with equal precision. Neither speaks. You sip your tea as the rain taps lightly on the wooden roof tiles above. Mainstream historical fact. Wei Qi has been played for over 500 years and is one of the oldest board games still played today, with a continuous tradition. It was considered one of the 4 essential arts of a learned Chinese scholar, along with calligraphy, music and painting. Not because it was fun, though perhaps it was, but because it required mental clarity, balance and a kind of calm ruthlessness. Unlike Liubo, whose rules are lost to history, Wei Qi's rules are maddeningly well documented. The basic gameplay is easy to learn, but mastering it, that's where the confusion begins. The board starts blank, but by mid-game, it's a complex web of tiny wars, alliances and bluffs. Every move ripples forward. Every placement creates thousands of new possibilities. You watch as the black player lays a stone just off-centre. It seems random, but the white player stiffens slightly, as if the implications are too subtle for you to notice. You probably missed something important. Or everything. Here's a quirky tidbit. During the Tang Dynasty, Wei Qi players were sometimes used as diplomatic tools. A foreign envoy might be invited to a game before formal negotiations began, not to intimidate them, but to test their temperament. Lose with grace, and you are considered trustworthy. Win too eagerly, and eyebrows were raised. And yes, historians still argue whether Wei Qi's emphasis on harmony and territory control subtly shaped bureaucratic policy. Some suggest that officials trained in the game tended to favour indirect conflict resolution and long-term strategy over immediate confrontation. Others say that's just wishful thinking. After all, a stone is still just a stone. You remember an old proverb, the board is a universe, the stone's its stars? That sounds poetic. Also exhausting. But you can see how this would appeal. The game rewards patience, cunning, a willingness to lose something small in order to win something big later. It's a game of presence, of watching not only your opponent's hands but their breath. They're blinking the slight twitch in their brow that means you've hit a nerve. And yet it's not war, not really. Wei Qi doesn't have a single moment of victory. It's not about checkmate. It's about slow domination. A kind of polite suffocation. You glance back at the players. They have paused. One is refilling the teacups with trembling hands. The other is gently tapping a stone against the rim of his bowl, perhaps calculating his next 10 moves, or just enjoying the rhythm. It's hard to tell. The idea that a game could be both relaxing and mentally punishing is fascinating. You think about trying to teach this to someone with a modern attention span. Okay, so it takes about 2 hours, and you won't know who's winning until the last 5 minutes pass. But back then, this was prized mental training, a ritual. You can imagine a young Confucian student sweating over his first game, trying not to let his hands shake, terrified of impressing or insulting his teacher. The game ends without ceremony. The stones are returned to their bowls, no words are exchanged. Just a tiny bow, and the sense that something enormous just happened, but no one needs to explain it. You rise bow slightly in return, and step back out into the drizzle. The street glistens the scent of wet bamboo and roast chestnuts curling up from a food cart nearby. You think of the board again, empty now, but still echoing with decisions made and space claimed. And for a brief moment you feel like a stone on a grid, small, placed deliberately, part of something larger than you can see. Section 4. The tea house fades behind you, its quiet rituals tucked neatly into the folds of the day, and you walk on through the buzzing streets of the Tang Dynasty capital Chang'an. The year is roughly 750 CA. The air smells of rain on limestone and fried sesame cakes, and paper lanterns sway like sleepy fireflies along colonnaded walkways. You're not heading to another scholar's game board this time. Tonight it's the Imperial Court. You've somehow secured an invitation to an evening banquet hosted by a low-ranking noble who is desperate to climb the social ladder, and naturally he's hosting the kind of gathering where silk outnumbers sincerity and a poorly timed belch can ruin your career. Inside the room is heavy with incense and ego. Lacquered screens shimmer with painted cranes. Courtiers lounge on embroidered cushions, sipping warm plum wine and pretending not to eavesdrop on everyone. And scattered between the trays of honeyed lotus root and steamed duck tongues, you begin to notice game boards. Not just one, several. Each with its own rules, its own etiquette, and its own players trying very hard not to show their sweating. Mainstream historical fact by the Tang Dynasty board games had become a fixture of elite culture. They weren't just entertainment, they were status displays. Hosting a game demonstrated refinement. Winning one without gloating showed character. Losing gracefully was considered a mark of true nobility, which is nice in theory. In practice, you're watching two minor officials silently duel over a game of shuanglu, and you're pretty sure they're both about to break into tears. Shuanglu is sometimes described as a hybrid of race game and dice game. Imagine ancient Parcheesi, but with more passive aggression. Players roll elongated bone dice and move pegs along a winding track toward a central heaven square. Supposedly it's about cosmic balance. Realistically, it's about watching your opponent's piece land just one space ahead of yours over and over again until you develop a philosophical crisis. Quirky detail. The dice are often carved with poetic characters instead of numbers. One side might read cloud, another jade, another regret. So instead of rolling a 5, you roll chrysanthemum and loss, or your host says, seeing your confusion. You must interpret the roll in light of the situation. You roll wind and goose. I suppose I should fly gracefully. Sideways you offer. He nods approvingly. You move your piece. You are now losing by 12 spaces. Over by the musicians, someone is playing Wei Qi, with a silk-robed woman who keeps slipping in veiled insults between her moves. Ah, placing your stone there, she says with a smile. So bold, so unorthodox. You're not sure if she means that as a compliment or a death threat. Historians still argue whether these games genuinely influenced relationships at court, or merely served as distractions during painfully long banquets. Some believe strategic play translated to court manoeuvring, while others argue that skill at a dice game doesn't necessarily indicate you'd be good at managing a grain tax rebellion. Still, these games did serve a purpose. They created controlled environments where tension could be aired out, egos could clash safely, and ambition could be tested quietly, politely, behind a screen of lacquer and laughter. One courtier challenges you to a game of Tiao Chi, a leapfrog-style contest, where one must move pieces by jumping over others, ideally with as few moves as possible. It sounds simple. It sounds... Until you realise that the pieces are painted with miniature zodiac animals, and there's a whole unspoken hierarchy about which animal can jump over which. You try to move the snake over the horse. A scandalised gasp erupts from across the room. Don't you know the horse rejects the snake in the month of bamboo? Someone whispers dramatically. You nod solemnly and withdraw your move. You will not be winning tonight. Here's the thing though, despite the posturing and the endless etiquette traps, it's oddly soothing. These games, maddening as they are, force you into stillness. You watch the patterns. You listen to the cadence of polite barbs. You learn when to speak and when to stay silent. And if you're lucky, you remember which animal is allowed to jump when. The night drags on. Someone sighs cuttis. Son Adindu, Visishikli Pan they go sit papsi go to high spoop size. Oh smaller. Don't want to fool so we go only how Bobo false so to oh midis savit. You manage to earn a vague nod from a silk-clad bureaucrat with particularly elaborate sideburns, which may count as a victory. You step outside just as the lanterns begin to dim. The street is quiet now. The game's packed away the plates of candied ginger picked clean. And though you leave empty-handed, you carry something with you. The deep, slow rhythm of courtly gaming, where every move is watched, every gesture is a message, and no one ever explains the rules. Section 5. You wake the next morning to the sound of a rooster with a personal vendetta and the lingering scent of last night's incense still woven into your sleeves. You rub the sleep from your eyes and remember you dreamt of tiles. Not the kind you use on a roof. These were smaller, heavier, and seemed to glow faintly even in the dream's half-light. So of course you set off to investigate. Your journey takes you to Luoyang, an ancient capital city known for poetry peonies, and as it turns out, some of the most confusing board game artifacts ever unearthed from the depths of Chinese tombs. You arrive just as the market is opening, greeted by the chaotic sounds of braying donkeys shouting vendors, and a flute player stubbornly ignoring his own rhythm. But you're not here for the sweet rice cakes or the slightly anxious fish. You're here for the museum, specifically the section tucked away behind the embroidered fan exhibit, where a small temperature-controlled room contains a handful of stone bone and ceramic game tiles dug up from imperial and aristocratic tombs. They're beautiful. Each is inscribed with delicate characters, abstract markings, or pictographs, clouds, birds, numbers, symbols of fortune and fate. Some are polished smooth by centuries of handling. Others are chipped, cracked, half melted by time. No two sets match. Mainstream historical fact, archaeological digs across Luoyang and other major burial sites have uncovered thousands of gaming pieces, tiles, tokens, dice counters. Some clearly belong to known games like Liubo or Shuanglu, but many don't match any known rule sets. They're mysterious outliers. Ghosts of games that vanished before anyone thought to write them down. One display features hexagonal tiles carved with symbols resembling trigrams from the I Ching. Another holds rectangular pieces with numbered dots on one side, and phrases like Step of the Crane and Beware the North Gate on the other. Were these four strategy gambling divination historians still argue whether some of these tiles were even meant for actual gameplay? Some think they were ceremonial. Others suggest they were used for solo meditation exercises, like board games for your soul, Still others insist they were simply toys, the ancient equivalent of pocket dice or trading cards. You study a set of tiles shaped like tiny shields. Each has a tiny hole drilled into the top. They may have been worn like charms or suspended during gameplay. One theory posits a game where players drew tiles blindly from a silk pouch and battled them based on rankings like an early version of a card game. You imagine the tension I draw the Tiger of the Western Wind. Oh no. I have walked us. The Sparrow of Regret. You lose. With dignity. Hopefully. Quirky tidbit 1, particularly strange set, includes a tile shaped like a peach pit lacquered black and engraved with the words, "Look behind you." No one knows what game it belonged to, but it definitely sounds like it had character. As you wander past the displays, your guide, a scholar with spectacularly bushy eyebrows, tells you that some of the most confusing tiles ever found were buried with a woman known only as Lady Jun. Her tomb included a game board with circular depressions, 3 unmarked dice, and dozens of mismatched tokens in the shapes of animals, tools, and food items. No instructions, no diagrams, just a full set of components that imply a game of dazzling complexity or a prank for the archaeologists. You pause in front of her reconstructed tomb chamber. It's cool and quiet. The tiles rest on a table exactly as they were found mid-game maybe, as if she just stepped away. And that's what sticks with you, the idea that someone played this once, maybe every night, maybe with family, maybe alone listening to the wind outside and wondering whether the rabbit token outranked the wine jug. So you leave the museum with your mind full of puzzle pieces, none of which quite fit together. But they don't need to. Because part of the magic of these games was that they left no trace, not in books, not in rules, only in shape and texture and speculation. On your way back through the market, you spot a vendor selling reproductions of ancient game tiles. You pick up one at random. It says Third Moon Empty Bowl. You nod. It feels about right. Section 6. You make your way to the countryside now, feet aching from city stone, and mind still swirling with half games and silent rules. The hills here are gentle and green, dotted with the remains of old garrisons and thatched inns with names like the Lucky Goose and the Horse that ate a map. You stop for lunch at a roadside tavern where the fish is suspiciously fresh, the noodles slightly overcooked, and the patrons just tipsy enough to be chatty. A grizzled man in a weather-stained officer's coat beckons you over. He's seated at a low table beneath a pergola of grapevines, and before him is a wooden board scratched with lines and marked with pebbles. Fancy a game, he asks, already rolling bone dice in one hand. You agree mostly because your tea hasn't arrived, and you don't have anything better to do. Best of 3, he says. Loser buys the next pot. The game, something halfway between a battlefield simulation and a tavern pastime, starts with each player placing 6 stones in different fortress spaces. Then the dice determine how far you move, how many troops you can recruit, and whether you're allowed to launch an ambush. It's charmingly chaotic. Mainstream historical fact, military commanders in both the Han and Tang dynasties were known to use adapted board games to practice tactics. These weren't formal war games as we know them today, but more like strategic exercises disguised as play. Using pebbles, tiles, or wooden figurines, commanders would play out imagined scenarios, while their soldiers watched, occasionally learning something, or at least being entertained. And while the games themselves varied wildly, many of them included elements still found in modern strategy games. Terrain, modifiers, morale systems, even resource management, though usually involving rice, not gold. Your opponent squints at his dice and frowns. Cursed rain, he mutters, moving one pebble to the edge of the board and tipping it sideways. My supply lines are wet. Quirky detail, some generals were notorious for getting emotionally involved in these games. One commander in the Southern Dynasty's period was said to have fired his second-in-command over a game dispute. The offence. The man had moved a troop out of formation to chase a goose-shaped token. It broke immersion, the general reportedly said. Historians still argue whether these war games genuinely sharpened battlefield acumen or simply gave commanders a chance to reinforce their own biases. Some believe the games encouraged long-term thinking and adaptability. Others say they promoted overconfidence, especially in those who kept winning on wooden boards, and then promptly lost in muddy fields. Back at the tavern, your opponent pours more tea, and slides a bowl of spiced nuts your way. He's talking now, slow, deliberate, with the voice of someone who once marched from one end of the empire to the other, and has absolutely no intention of doing it again. He tells you about games played beside campfires in muddy tents beneath rain-stained banners, about how one captain once predicted a traitor by watching which player always positioned their pebbles closest to the gate tile. He was always trying to escape, even in play, the captain said. Another tale, a pair of scouts once used game pieces as a coded message. By arranging the tokens in a specific formation and leaving them on a rock near the river crossing, they warned their commander of enemy troop movements, without ever speaking a word. You finish the second round, it's a draw. The third begins. The dice clatter, and suddenly you're being flanked by a manoeuvre called the crooked duck. You counter with a move he's never seen before, mostly because you made it up. He stares at the board, then at you. You're either very clever, he says, or very tired. You nod. Both can be true. The final round ends when he sacrifices 3 pebbles to trigger a flood that wipes out both of your strongholds. Victory through mutual disaster, he declares, leaning back with a sigh. You toast to it. As the sun dips lower, you head back onto the road, refreshed in a way that has nothing to do with tea, and everything to do with the kind of companionship found only between strangers, with no intention of winning too hard. The hills blur into the horizon. Somewhere behind you, pebbles are being gathered for the next match, and ahead another mystery, probably involving a child, a chicken, and a missing dice set. You hope so anyway. Section 7. You reach a small village as dusk settles in the kind of place where roofs tilt a little too much and everyone's laundry seems to flap in the same rhythm. There's a well in the centre, a crooked shrine beside it, and a group of children crouched in the dirt, entirely absorbed in a game that appears to involve pebble sticks and a vaguely menacing chicken. You approach, trying not to interrupt whatever complex ritual is unfolding. The chicken, who appears to be both judge and participant, pecks once at a pile of twigs and then waddles off in what looks like moral protest. The children giggle, and one calls out, "You can't move your peach stone unless the shadow passes the gourd." Another responds, "Only if the stick is pointing south." You nod, as though this clears everything up. Mainstream historical fact, while many ancient Chinese board games were associated with elites commoners, and children played their own versions in formal, improvised, and often featuring rules that changed by the hour. Archaeological evidence suggests that clay dice, carved bones, and homemade tiles were used in both urban and rural settings by people of all ages. And unlike the formalised sets buried with nobles, these everyday games were ephemeral, scratched into dirt, played with whatever was nearby and constantly evolving. You squat down to observe. The current game seems to be part race, part fortune-telling, and part who can make up the weirdest rule on the spot. A flat stone is passed in circles, and players chant something about the rooster of dusk before flicking another piece toward a chalk circle. One child, perhaps 8 years old, and wielding the authority of a village elder, declares that anyone who lands on the shadow square must balance a stick on their head until the next turn. His friend protests. Only if the stick isn't cursed, cue more laughter. A new rule is born. Quirky tidbit in some regions, game pieces were believed to absorb energy. A lucky tile could become a treasured object passed from sibling to sibling. Some children whispered stories of trick pieces tiles that always helped or always betrayed. One tale tells of a boy who blamed his losing streak on a jade button that had, according to him, held a grudge. Historians still argue whether children's games in ancient China were simply playful or deeply reflective of the social structures around them. Some scholars see them as microcosms of Confucian hierarchies, elders assigning rules, younger children following them. Others view them as pockets of rebellion, where kids rewrote logic and decorum into absurd poetry. One girl uses a pine needle to draw a complex spiral in the dirt. She calls it the path of regrets and says any piece that lands on it has to tell a secret or sing. A small boy confesses that he once fed a steamed bun to the village goat. Applause. You sit and watch the game continue until the shadows lengthen and someone's grandmother calls them in for dinner. The game ends mid-turn without conclusion. No winner. Just a smattering of pebbles in the dust and one triumphant chicken perched atop the well. It's a quiet reminder, not every game needs a scorecard. Sometimes it's about the rhythm of invention, the shared ritual of randomness, and the comfort of knowing tomorrow's version will be just different enough to keep things interesting. As the kids scatter, you notice one of them leaving behind a handmade tile flat, round with a smiling face scratched on one side and the word cloud on the other. You tuck it into your sleeve. Not as a clue, not as evidence, just as a reminder that the best rules are sometimes the ones you make up on the fly. You head toward the inn. The village glows soft in the lantern light. Somewhere someone plays a flute badly. Someone else sneezes dramatically. And you traveller of confusing games and unpredictable chickens feel entirely at home. Section 8. You're deep into your journey now, farther from cities closer to forests. And the roads are quieter, lined with pine needles, and that squishy kind of silence that suggests either enlightenment or an incoming thunderstorm. Your boots are muddy, your sandwich is damp, and just ahead, through the trees, rises a surprisingly well-maintained structure with gold-tipped eaves and a red gate carved in the shape of a tiger's mouth. You've arrived at the summer retreat of a provincial governor, one of those men who was once probably terrifying in the capital, but has since mellowed into a combination of silk robes and grilled fish. He greets you with a half bow and a full platter of snacks. "Come in," he says. "We're just about to start a game." You step into a hall lined with scrolls and lanterns. There's a low table in the centre, and beside it sits a scribe with very sharp eyebrows and very soft slippers. On the table is a game board, something between Liubo and Weiqi, with complicated symbols etched into its edges, and tiny metal tokens shaped like mythological creatures. The governor claps. "We call this one Path of the Celestial Duck. I invented it." "Of course he did." You glance at the scribe, who shrugs. "We let him win." Mainstream historical fact in imperial China, especially under certain dynasties, like the Song and Ming emperors, and high-ranking officials often altered, invented, or rewrote the rules of games to suit their preferences or their egos. Games were not just recreation. They were performative rituals, and power was always part of the rules, spoken or unspoken. When the emperor played the game, shifted, sometimes literally. If he wanted a new rule mid-round, it became canon. If he didn't like how a piece moved, it was changed. If he lost, well, no, he didn't. Historians still argue whether these changes were recorded out of respect or fear. Some texts suggest elaborate systems that likely began as simple diversions, but were enhanced to reflect imperial philosophy. Others suggest the whole purpose was to confuse guests into deference. Quirky tidbit, there's a record of one emperor who demanded that his own laughter be incorporated as a game mechanic. If he laughed, all opposing players had to remove one piece from the board. This reportedly led to some very nervous rounds of forced merriment and strategic silence. Back at the governor's table, he explains the rules. Sort of. You roll the dice, he says, unless the phoenix token is on the east square, in which case you sing instead of rolling. You nod politely. If your jade turtle reaches the spiral gate, he continues, you may challenge another player to a riddle. If they answer wrong, you win. If they answer right, we drink tea. You glance at your tokens. You've been given a wooden ox and a silver carp. Both seem deeply confused by their circumstances. The game begins. Tokens move. Tea is poured. the governor declares a critical moment and introduces the rule of reverse sorrow, which he just made up, but insists is traditional. You play along offering a riddle when your ox reaches the thunder corner. What weighs nothing feeds no one, and fills a hall. The scribe answers without blinking. Ambition. The governor applauds. You drink tea. You might be winning. You might also be under house arrest. It's unclear, but despite the constant shifting, it's kind of lovely. The game breathes. It adapts to the mood of the players. It responds to the room. It mirrors the kind of bureaucracy the governor probably administers vague rules, flexible enforcement, and success depending largely on your tone of voice and ability to fake confidence. As the sun begins to sink behind the pine trees, the governor sighs and declares the game inconclusive but emotionally satisfying. The scribe takes down notes. You're given a token to remember the event, a tiny phoenix with one wing bent slightly as though it's mid-argument. You take it and bow. The governor beams. Outside the air is cool and pine-scented. You tuck the phoenix into your sleeve with your smiling cloud tile. Together they rattle faintly a little museum of improvisation and absurdity. And you walk on thinking maybe the best games are the ones that never finish. The ones that shift, that allow room for laughter, for errors, for governors to invent rules that make no sense, but somehow still feel just right. You smile. Your carp token is now your lucky piece. Probably. Section 9. The road curves inland now, winding through mist-covered valleys and stone bridges etched with mossy poetry. You pass farmers guiding oxen monks, tapping prayer beads, and one very determined goose leading a herd of children across a field. Your feet are sore. Your sleeves are damp with dew. But the air is fresh, and your mind is clearer than it's been in days. You're on your way to a government school, a modest stone complex tucked into a hillside, where bamboo creaks in the breeze, and young men in worn blue robes are memorizing Confucian passages with the grim intensity of people who've forgotten what fun feels like. They're training to become bureaucrats, officials, tax collectors, justice clerks, people who will spend their careers arguing about ink colour and the proper size of ledger margins. And surprisingly they play games, not the kind with phoenix tokens or thunder corners. No, these games are flatter, slower, more procedural. Welcome to the world of training boards. Inside the school's main hall, you're shown to a corner where a group of students sits cross-legged around a long rectangular board divided into squares. Each square is labelled with words like corruption, petition, grain storage, and argument. A student draws a token from a wooden box. Unlicensed salt vendor, he announces. His peers groan. Mainstream historical fact during the Song and Ming dynasties, there's evidence that board games were used as part of the civil service training process. These weren't games of chance, but moral and administrative simulations, turn-based scenarios meant to test judgment ethics and knowledge of bureaucratic procedure. The goal wasn't to win, it was to demonstrate wisdom. A good move showed you understood the Confucian ideals of balance, restraint, and fairness. A poor move revealed a mind likely to abuse power, or worse, misplace forms. You watch as one student moves his piece to the report delay square and offers a long explanation about why he chose to reprimand rather than arrest the salt vendor. Another nods, noting that mercy aligns with righteous governance, scroll number 2, quirky tidbit. Some training boards had hidden traps. Land on gift from noble cousin, and you might trigger a corruption investigation. Accept the gift, and you're out of the game. Refuse it, and gain integrity. Points. Keep refusing too many gifts, and you become bureaucratically isolated, which has its own consequences. Subtle, but brutal. Historians still argue whether these simulations actually produced more ethical officials or just better actors. Some suggest that the process encouraged rote memorization of virtue rather than genuine reflection. Others believe the very act of playing forced students to internalise moral frameworks in a way lectures couldn't. One student sighs as he's assigned public well repair budget dispute. He frowns. If I grant the funds, the rice inspectors will be underpaid. If I don't, the villagers protest. He looks at you. Would you rather be mobbed or blamed? You shrug. Depends if I've eaten. He nods solemnly. A fair point, the game continues. Players present petitions, resolve imaginary lawsuits, and navigate shifting allegiances. No dice. No flashy pieces. Just words, judgment, and a stack of bamboo slips that someone keeps knocking over. You notice something subtle. These students aren't competing. They're collaborating, challenging each other's logic, refining ideas, correcting phrasing. There's tension, yes, but no gloating. Just the slow shaping of minds like clay being pressed into its final form. Here's a moment one student makes a questionable call on a case involving a runaway ox. The others pause. Then a quiet voice says, "That lacks harmony." A soft correction. A lesson in tone, not just content. You leave the hall as the bell rings for a writing break. The students bow politely, then dive into their scrolls like warriors returning to battle. Outside, a small board leans against a tree. It's painted crudely with just 3 squares, T no T, and surprise inspection. You smile. Even future tax clerks need a laugh. And as you head down the stone path, passing a fluttering laundry line and a chicken who seems to be judging your posture, you realise something. The game of governance is complicated. So is the game of life. But sometimes the best practice for both is a wooden board, a quiet room, and a group of people willing to tell you when your ox budget doesn't make sense. Section 10. The rain finds you just outside a sleepy town wrapped in mulberry trees and riddled with slow-moving ox carts. You duck beneath the overhang of an abandoned stall, nibbling the last of your soggy sesame biscuit, while thunder grumbles overhead like a bureaucrat who lost his pen. A local scholar, Robe's patched beard expressive, spots you and waves you inside a nearby pavilion where he's sheltering with a few others. He's carrying a scroll carefully tied with faded blue silk, and he unrolls it like he's revealing a secret dessert. "I think you'll appreciate this," he says. "It's a rule set." You blink. A rule set for what? He shrugs. No one knows. Mainstream historical fact in 1973. Archaeologists in Hubei province unearthed a Han Dynasty tomb containing numerous bamboo slips, including one believed to be a set of rules for a now-lost board game. The document described elaborate mechanics, tokens, dice scoring penalties, and bizarre rituals, 47 distinct rules in all, but gave no diagram, no name, and no description of the board itself. And that's what this scholar has a copied fragment of that baffling list. The writing is dense, the characters tight and formal. You sit beside him as he traces a finger along the lines. Rule 13, he says, states that no token may retreat from Raingate unless it has first passed through the soundless path. You blink again. What's Raingate? He smiles. Precisely. Each rule seems to introduce 3 new questions. Token conflict may only occur under Northern Breath. If dice match invoke the empty circle. 1 jar of wine counts as 2 unless the board is reversed. It reads like part instruction manual, part philosophical treatise, part passive-aggressive haiku. Historians still argue whether this game ever existed in playable form. Some believe it was a thought experiment designed not to be played but to be considered like a riddle with no solution. Others suggest it was a meditative practice, perhaps played by a single person seeking harmony with abstract principles. A third camp thinks it was simply incomplete, a half-finished project, or an elaborate prank left behind by a bored scribe. Quirky tidbit: 1 rule in the scroll has been translated as "He who forgets Rule 5 must eat plum seeds," which is either a punishment or a digestive aid. Possibly both. The scholar beside you proposes a theory. Perhaps it was a metagame. The rules were the game. Players argued about how to play instead of actually playing. You consider this. It's not the worst idea. Half the games you've witnessed so far have relied more on interpretation than movement. To test it, you and the others gathered beneath the pavilion decide to invent the board. Someone uses a broken tile to scratch squares into the dirt. Another grabs beans from a snack pouch to use as tokens. A third draws a circle and labels it Raingate. You play, you don't know what you're doing. You know what you're doing. But the rules give just enough scaffolding to allow for play like scaffolding on a house that might never be built but is still fun to climb. Someone lands on the soundless path. You all pause, then nod. That feels correct. Soon you're invoking Rule 27. All disputes are settled with Proverbs, and Rule 9, through passes, grant forgiveness unless the third is windy. It makes no sense, and it makes perfect sense. And as the storm passes outside, leaving only the scent of wet earth and fallen petals, you realise that the joy isn't in mastery, it's in the chaos. The guessing, the laughter, the game that refuses to explain itself but still invites you to play. Eventually the scholar rolls up the scroll and tucks it back into his sleeve. Care to try again tomorrow? He asks. You nod. Nod and no, if I remember Rule 5. Barv. The others chuckle, and you step back into the misty evening, your boots a little muddier, your mind a little lighter. You've played a game no one knows with rules no one agrees on, and walked away feeling strangely victorious. Sometimes the point isn't knowing what you're doing. It's doing it anyway. Section 11. The sky is clear the next morning. One of those soft, pale blue days where nothing feels urgent and everything seems like it might just sort itself out if left alone long enough. You follow a narrow footpath toward a cluster of houses that appear to have been built by people who deeply respected rooftops but had mixed feelings about walls. This, your guide tells you with a grin, is where the fortune-telling games happen. You raise an eyebrow. Fortune-telling. With board games. He nods. And occasionally with fruit. Mainstream historical fact in several regions of ancient and medieval China, particularly during the late Han and early Tang periods, young women, and occasionally matchmaking family members, played symbolic games designed to forecast love marriage prospects or future household harmony. These weren't crystal ball affairs, but structured games involving tokens dice and a healthy dose of social tension. You're ushered into a courtyard filled with fluttering silk ribbons and a table laid with all the seriousness of an imperial tribunal. At its centre is a square board divided into labelled sections: Harmony Discord, Long Journey, Broken Teapot, and Surprise Visit from Aunt. Each player rolls dice carved with characters like Peach Candle Window and Moth. A young woman, her hair carefully arranged and her sleeves suspiciously clean, tosses 2 dice and lands on Candle and Moth. Gasps from the spectators. Someone whispers, "That means unexpected romance by lantern light." She blushes, or pretends to. You're handed your own dice. You roll broom and teacup. The interpreter squints. Domestic labour, followed by mild satisfaction. You nod. That feels about right. That town. Quirky tidbits and matchmaking games involved. Drawing tokens from a fabric pouch containing miniatures, shoes, ducks, brushes, coins. Each symbol had a layered meaning. A comb might mean a suitor with good manners. A duck might mean a stable household. A shoe with a hole. A long marriage with little comfort. Charming. Historians still argue whether these games were sincere divination tools or elaborate ways to express feelings in a society that frowned upon direct courtship. Some scholars claim the games were used to ease anxieties about arranged marriages. Others believe they were coded forms of communication, especially for women with limited means to speak freely. In one version of the game, the board includes a space called Willow Gate, said to signify choice. Land on it, and the player could refuse the entire reading. A symbolic moment of agency, however fleeting. A middle-aged auntie claps her hands and declares a new round. This time each roll is followed by a poetic couplet recited from memory. The girl who rolled mirror and storm is now doomed to marry a man with confusing emotions and nice hair. You can't help but smile. The whole affair is half sincere, half performance. But somewhere between the laughter and the serious furrowed brows, there's truth. Or something close to it. Because as your guide explains, these games weren't really about fate, they were about framing the unknown, giving shape to feelings too complex to name, offering structure to the chaos of hope. As the game winds down and the last fate tokens are gathered back into their lacquered box, you're offered a slice of dried plum and a handwritten couplet folded neatly into a paper fan. Your fortune reads, a quiet hand, a lucky die, may turn the tide beneath the sky. You don't know what it means, but you keep it anyway, because maybe that's the point. Section 12. The sun hangs low now, casting that lazy golden light that makes even cracked walls and uneven tiles look poetic. You've wandered to the edge of a small town, the kind with one tea stall, 2 barbers, and an endless supply of opinions. There's a gathering of elders under a pergola made of crooked bamboo poles, playing what looks like a game, but sounds more like a moral debate disguised as polite small talk. One man makes a move, places a flat disc on a square marked stream of courtesy and says, "Of course, a gentleman never boasts even after victory." His opponent replies by setting his piece on pillar of truth, arching an eyebrow, and murmuring, "Unless silence encourages false pride." You've stumbled into one of those games that's as much Confucian philosophy seminar as it is competitive pastime. Mainstream historical fact. During various dynastic periods, especially under the influence of Confucianism, there was ongoing cultural tension around the role of leisure activities. Some scholars viewed board games as tools for cultivating discipline, mindfulness, and strategy, while others worried that they encouraged arrogance, distraction, or frivolity. And in certain scholarly circles, playing a game was expected to demonstrate virtue, not just skill. Winning mattered less than how you carried yourself while doing it. A sore loser was a fool, a sore winner unforgivable. The men invite you to join. They call the game Zhengdao, the Path of Rectitude. The board is laid out like a scroll divided into realms, named after abstract ideals: harmony, courage, benevolence, moderation and restraint. The goal is to move your piece to the middle way, but only after passing through a series of tests, usually posed as dilemmas. You land on debate at the ancestral hall. A small token shaped like a rooster is handed to you. The eldest smiles. Your uncle dishonours the family name, but is kind to beggars. Do you defend him at the festival? You pause. Depends if he brings wine. They all chuckle. A practical Confucian one says, making a note with a brush pen, that's seen more ink than daylight. Quirky tidbit: one version of Zhengdao included real-time audience voting. Spectators would cast tokens to approve or disapprove of a player's decision, influencing the outcome not by logic, but by social perception. It turned the game into an impromptu ethics play with snacks. Historians still argue whether such games genuinely helped reinforce Confucian teachings, or simply provided scholars a chance to show off their memorization of obscure maxims. Some suggest the games were subtle tools of ideological training. Others believe they were simply excuses to drink tea, quote ancestors and feel superior, without ever raising their voice. Back at the pergola, a new round begins. One player lands on gift from a rival. He hesitates. If I refuse, I insult him, he says. If I accept, I seem compromised. A murmur goes around the group. Someone suggests return the gift with another of equal value, but addressed to his grandmother. Applause. Game theory meets etiquette. There's something soothing about it. The way the game channels life's messiness into something with rules, even if the rules are open to interpretation, even if half the players are making them up with scholarly flair. The sun dips lower. The shadows stretch. One of the elders stands and offers you a small token, a wooden disc engraved with the character for balance. You played well, he says. You didn't win, but you asked the right questions. You bow, tucking the token into your sleeve alongside the smiling cloud tile and the crooked phoenix. Your sleeve is starting to sound like a philosophy class in motion. You step away from the pergola, the laughter and the brushstrokes fading behind you, and you think about the strange tension woven into these games. The joy of play weighed against the gravity of ethics, the pressure to win quietly, the challenge of using leisure to prove worth. In a world obsessed with appearances, maybe the true victory was learning to pretend you didn't care who won. You walk on listening to the sound of crickets waking up, and the faint echo of a rooster token still clucking somewhere D. Continue in your moral compass. Section 13. You leave the last town with your robe, slightly dusted in pastry crumbs, and your mind full of ethics debate, and that unsettling rooster-shaped token that may or may not now haunt your subconscious. The road bends upward into the hills, where mist clings to the trees like gossip, and the quiet hum of wind through pine needles replaces the chatter of town squares. At the top of one ridge, tucked into a glade of cypress and prayer flags, you find a small monastery. The air smells of cedar smoke and clean stone. A monk in grey robes greets you with a slow nod and a bowl of barley porridge. No words, just kindness, the kind that doesn't require introductions. You're invited inside, where a few monks sit cross-legged around a shallow wooden tray filled with dried beans and polished pebbles. There are no dice, no board, just careful hands and small movements. One of them gestures for you to sit. You do. Mainstream historical fact, while not as widely documented as imperial court games, some Buddhist and Taoist monasteries developed quiet, contemplative forms of play that blended repetition counting and pattern recognition. These weren't games in the traditional sense. They weren't about winning or beating an opponent, but rather about rhythm focus and meditation. Think spiritual Sudoku, if Sudoku involved beans and enlightenment. The game here, whatever it's called, begins slowly. One monk arranges 10 pebbles into a line. Another places a bean beside the third stone. You wait unsure whether it's your turn or a moment of silence. Eventually someone slides a stone to the left and places a second bean beside it. Everyone nods. You do the same. It's mesmerizing. A pattern forms, then breaks, then reforms. There's no talking, but you start to sense when a move is right. Not because it follows logic, but because it feels balanced, symmetrical, somehow kind. Quirky tidbit one Taoist sect is said to have developed a game called Heaven's Grain, in which players used rice to form symmetrical designs, correcting each other gently if a shape was imbalanced. The goal wasn't accuracy, it was attunement. Players were judged not by speed or cleverness, but by the calmness of their breath while playing. Historians still argue whether these games were tools for teaching discipline or simply evolved from idle habits into rituals. Some claim they were used during periods of silent retreat, as a way to keep the hands busy while the mind wandered toward the divine. Others think they were just soothing, and in a world of endless temple chores, a few beans and pebbles offered a rare moment of peace. The monk beside you places a bean directly in the centre of the tray and makes a small circle around it with his finger. He smiles. You nod, unsure what you've just agreed to, but sensing it was important. Hours pass like fog, thick and soft and without urgency. The tray empties and refills. The sun shifts. At one point, a small breeze sends a few beans tumbling, and everyone chuckles with the gentle amusement of people who've learned to care without clinging. You don't remember when the game ends, or if it ever does. But eventually you rise. A monk hands you a pouch containing 5 of the smoothest pebbles from the tray. On the outside, stitched in fine thread, is the character for quiet. You tuck it into your already quite philosophical sleeve. There are now enough tokens in there to start a museum or a moral crisis. As you descend from the monastery, your footsteps slow. The rhythm of the bean game lingers in your muscles. The silence follows you, not empty but full of something soft and reassuring. And you think not every game needs rules. Some just need rhythm. Rhythm and patience and a little bit of barley porridge. Section 14. The trail you follow begins to unravel like a scroll unfurled beneath your feet. With each step, the land changes subtly. Rice paddies giving way to dusty terraces, foothills melting into flatter plains, until finally you sense the sea before you hear it. There's a lightness in the air, that salty kind of promise, that means you're nearing the edge of the land and the beginning of something vast. You arrive in a small coastal village, more a gentle exhale of buildings than a bustling port. Fishermen haul up woven nets strung with glistening silver fish. Seaweed dries in thick green bundles along fences. A sleepy goat watches you from the roof of a tea house, as if it's waiting for the next round of a game you don't yet know how to play. This is where the Silk Roads kissed the ocean, where good stories and games came to rest, or caught a new wind toward somewhere else. Mainstream historical fact. The Silk Roads weren't just land routes. Maritime Silk Roads connected port towns all across East and Southeast Asia, linking China with India, the Middle East, and eventually far-off corners of Africa and Europe. Merchants, monks and sailors brought more than goods. They brought customs, dances, spices, and yes, games. You're drawn to the village square, where beneath a canvas awning painted with faded dragons, a group of elders sits around a low table. The board before them is carved from sea-polished driftwood, the markings barely legible, as though the sea itself had softened the rules over time. "Come, traveller," says one, tapping a spot beside him. We play the game of the tides. You hesitate, not recognising the board. But that's never stopped you before. The game begins with each player placing shell-shaped tokens on carved depressions that form a spiral. Instead of dice, you flip polished stones, black on one side, white on the other. 2 white sides mean the tide rises. 2 black. The tide recedes. Mixed results produce a current and trigger a rule so complex the elder needs to hum first to remember it. Each player has a ship token. Yours is a scallop shell painted red. The others are a driftwood fish, a carved jade shrimp, and something that might be a pine cone. You're told to move your token along the spiral when the current flows with your astrological alignment, which you're told is evening snake. You accept this without question. Quirky tidbit throughout the Tang and Song periods. Local coastal games often incorporated ideas borrowed from multiple cultures. In one fishing village, archaeologists discovered game pieces made from Persian glass set into Chinese wooden boards. Another unearthed a parchment scroll with rules written in a blend of Chinese Sanskrit and Arabic characters. The implication games were constantly rewritten by the sea. Back at your table, your scallop shell drifts into a space marked with the character for memory. Everyone looks at you expectantly. You're told to share a memory of a time you made a foolish decision involving fish. You tell them about the fermented crab you ate on a dare 3 villages ago. Polite laughter. One elder claps. You may now trade tokens with the pine cone. So you do. You now control what may or may not be a seed pod. The game continues. Someone's shrimp lands in storm, and they must cover their eyes for 2 turns. The jade fish reaches harbour, but the tide recedes before it can land. Your pine cone sails serenely through lost compass, which apparently means you must ask someone for advice. You choose the goat on the tea house roof. It offers none. This isn't a game with winners. It's a game with outcomes. Yours is that you must carry your pine cone to the sea and toss it in. The tide will decide whether your voyage continues. So you do. The sun is setting now orange against the slate blue of the water. You walk to the shoreline, your pine cone in hand. The waves greet your feet, cool and persistent. You toss the token gently into the surf and watch it bob once, twice. then vanish. No applause, no scorecard, just the sea returning everything to movement. Historians still argue whether these coastal games had coherent rule sets, or if they evolved so organically that each version was a new game entirely. Some researchers see in them a philosophy of impermanence. Others argue they were just excuses to sit, sip rice wine, and reflect on bad fish decisions. Either way, the tradition continues. That evening you're invited to a second game by a different family. This one involves crab-shaped tokens, seaweed cards, and a single white die that determines wind direction. You play 2 rounds, lose both. But you're gifted a pebble polished by the sea, with a tiny crab painted in cinnabar. You tuck it into your sleeve, next to the phoenix, next to the smiling cloud. Your sleeve is no longer a collection, it's a coastline of memory. And as night falls over the sea, and the villagers hang their lanterns, each one bobbing like a drifting star, you sit in silence. The breeze is soft. The games are done. But the rhythm of play still echoes beneath your ribs. Somewhere out there, ships sail. Merchants laugh, dice roll, and rules change again. The tide is always rewriting. Section 15. You wake to the sound of gulls bickering overhead, and the aroma of fish congee drifting through the open window of your room above the harbour. The tide has slipped out in the night, leaving behind a beach gleaming with shells and seaweed, and one very confused crab navigating its way around a sandal. Your bag is packed, your sandals still slightly damp, and your sleeve, well, your sleeve is heavy. Not with weight, but with story. With all the strange and wonderful tokens collected across your journey through the hazy, meandering world of ancient Chinese board games. You descend the stairs, slowly stretching as you go. Downstairs, the innkeeper's son is balancing a seashell on his nose while reciting what sounds like the rules to a game involving shrimp sand and emotional weather. You wish him luck. Outside the village square is sleepy but stirring. A game from last night is still half finished beneath the awning. No one dares clean it up, part out of respect, part because no one remembers who was winning. You step into the street, walking slowly. Your journey is almost done, and everything seems wrapped in golden light. Even the rooster that tries to steal your dumpling seems more companionable now. You're heading back inland, not for a new destination, but because endings like board games must return to the centre before they can truly finish. Mainstream historical fact. Chinese board games didn't vanish, they evolved. As dynasties rose and fell, the games adapted. Pieces changed shape. Boards gained or lost corners. Names shifted. But the core idea, playing to understand, to learn, to connect, remained. In some form or another, they continued on from street corners to salons to silent monasteries. And some of them survive even now, hidden in new clothes. The movement of chess, the randomness of mahjong, the subtle strategy of Go. You pass a travelling merchant and his daughter playing a quiet round of what looks like Liubo, though their version uses beans and ribbons. The girl is clearly winning. Her father clearly doesn't mind. You smile. That's how it should be. Quirky tidbit: one village near the Yangtze once recorded a board game that was played only during solar eclipses. The board was burned after each match, and the winner had to compose a poem about the match before sunrise, or else risk losing the favour of the moon. No one knows why. But the village still has a wall full of strange little eclipse poems. Historians still argue whether these fragmented traditions add up to a singular legacy, or simply reflect a nation's fondness for spinning quiet meaning from ordinary things. Some say the games were philosophical tools. Others call them artifacts of leisure. But perhaps they're neither. Perhaps they were just moments, contained within carved wood and patterned cloth, played between bites of lunch, between seasons, between wars and weddings. As you walk, you pause by a stream and unpack your tokens. You lay them out on a flat rock, the smiling cloud tile from the children's game, the crooked phoenix from the governor's invention, the token of balance from the moral pergola, the bean-polished pebble from the mountain monastery, the mystery tile from the rain-soaked scroll, the scallop shell from the tide game, the cinnabar crab from last night's festival. You arrange them into a circle, no rules, no goal, just the feeling of return. And you realise this wasn't a journey through games, it was a game. The journey was the game. Each token, each turn, each pause, each roll. The moments of clarity and the moments where no one, not even the monks, had any idea what was happening. And it was beautiful. You wake to the sound of gulls bickering overhead and the aroma of fish congee drifting through the open window of your room above the harbour. The tide has slipped out in the night, leaving behind a beach gleaming with shells and seaweed, and one very confused crab navigating its way around a sandal. Your bag is packed, your sandals still slightly damp, and your sleeve is heavy. Not with weight, but with story. With all the strange and wonderful tokens collected across your journey through the hazy, meandering world of ancient Chinese board games. You descend the stairs slowly, stretching as you go. Downstairs, the innkeeper's son is balancing a seashell on his nose while reciting what sounds like the rules to a game involving shrimp sand and emotional weather. You wish him luck. Outside the village square is sleepy but stirring. A game from last night is still half finished beneath the awning. No one dares clean it up, part out of respect, part because no one remembers who was winning. You step into the street, walking slowly. Your journey is almost done, and everything seems wrapped in golden light. Even the rooster that tries to steal your dumpling seems more companionable now. You're heading back inland, not for a new destination, but because endings like board games must return to the centre before they can truly finish. Mainstream historical fact. Chinese board games didn't vanish, they evolved. As dynasties rose and fell, the games adapted. Pieces changed shape, boards gained or lost corners, names shifted, but the core idea, playing to understand, to learn, to connect, remained. In some form or another, they continued on from street corners to salons to silent monasteries. And some of them survive even now, hidden in new clothes. The movement of chess, the randomness of mahjong, the subtle strategy of Go. You pass a travelling merchant and his daughter playing a quiet round of what looks like Liubo, though their version uses beans and ribbons. The girl is clearly winning. Her father clearly doesn't mind. You smile. That's how it should be. Quirky tidbit, one village near the Yangtze once recorded a board game that was played only during solar eclipses. The board was burned after each match, and the winner had to compose a poem about the match before sunrise, or else risk losing the favour of the moon. No one knows why. But the village still has a wall full of strange little eclipse poems. Historians still argue whether these fragmented traditions add up to a singular legacy, or simply reflect a nation's fondness for spinning quiet meaning from ordinary things. Some say the games were philosophical tools. Others call them artifacts of leisure. But perhaps they're neither. Perhaps they were just moments, contained within carved wood and patterned cloth, played between bites of lunch, between seasons, between wars and weddings. As you walk, you pause by a stream and unpack your tokens. You lay them out on a flat rock. The smiling cloud tile from the children's game, the crooked phoenix from the governor's invention, the token of balance from the moral pergola, the bean-polished pebble from the mountain monastery, the mystery tile from the rain-soaked scroll, the scallop shell from the tide game, the cinnabar crab from last night's festival. You arrange them into a circle, no rules, no goal, just the feeling of return. And you realise this wasn't a journey through games. It was a game. The journey was the game. Each token, each turn, each pause, each roll. The moments of clarity, and the moments where no one, not even the monks, had any idea what was happening. And it was beautiful.